The first sound is not the strike of stone against stone, it is wind moving through dry grass, insects lifting from the mud at the edge of a shrinking pool, and the distant agitation of animals that have smelled blood. Somewhere in East Africa, more than 2 million years ago, a carcass lies beneath a white sky. Vultures gather first. Hyenas arrive with jaws strong enough to open bone. Cats wait in the shade, patient and heavy with muscle. Near the edge of this dangerous circle stands a small, upright primate, neither fully at home in the trees nor yet built for the long, effortless walking of later humans. Its hands are empty for the moment. The ground around it is not. This is the world into which Homo Habilis appears, but it is not an empty stage waiting for a hero. Other hominins already move through these landscapes. Some have powerful jaws and broad chewing teeth. Some are more lightly built. Some may already know that certain stones break with useful edges. The oldest known stone technologies begin before the fossils traditionally assigned to Homo habilis, so the old picture of a single inventor raising the first tool into the light no longer holds. What survives in the record suggests something more complicated. Several kinds of hominin may have been experimenting with stone and carrying those habits through a world that refused to stay the same. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the mystery here is not simply who struck the first flake, it is what happened after stone entered daily life. When an object from the ground began to change access to food, movement across the landscape, the use of the hand, and perhaps the direction of human evolution itself. East Africa at this time is often imagined as one endless savanna, but the real landscape is far more broken. Lakes expand and retreat. Rivers shift their channels. Woodlands survive along watercourses and on higher ground, while open grasslands spread elsewhere. Wet periods turn basins green and productive. Drier intervals shrink them into dusty mosaics of mudflats, thorn scrub, exposed stone, and isolated shade. The climate does not change in one smooth direction. It pulses. Rainfall becomes less predictable. Habitats fragment, reconnect, and fragment again. A group that finds fruit, roots, or animal remains in one season may return to discover that the water has moved or another species has claimed the site. This instability matters because survival depends not only on strength, but on flexibility. A specialized animal can thrive when its favored food is abundant, yet suffer when that food disappears. A more adaptable creature may endure by changing what it eats, where it travels, and how it uses the objects around it. Homo habilis emerges within this tension. It does not possess the tall body or long-distance efficiency of later Homo erectus. It remains small, vulnerable, and surrounded by animals that can outrun, overpower, or consume it. Yet vulnerability creates pressure of its own. When teeth are not enough and claws are absent, behavior becomes part of the body's defense. The lakes and river margins of the Turkana Basin, Oldowan, and other parts of eastern Africa bring resources together. Water attracts grazing animals. Grazing animals attract predators. Floods expose cobbles and move stone through channels. Plants cluster in wet ground. Fish, turtles, birds, and small mammals gather near the shore. These places are rich, but never peaceful. A hominin approaching a carcass is not walking into a pantry. It is entering a contested zone filled with scent, noise, and risk. A safe opportunity may last only minutes. A sharp edge matters because it makes time useful. Flesh can be removed more quickly. Tendons can be cut. Hide can be opened before a larger scavenger returns. Yet stone matters even beyond butchery. It can pound, crush, scrape, and fracture. It may process fibrous plants, crack hard foods, expose marrow, or prepare materials that leave little trace. The archaeological record favours durable objects and marks on bone, but most ancient behaviour disappears, wood rots, plant matter decays, fibres vanish, even stone surfaces can be altered by sediment, water, trampling, and chemical weathering. Scholars still debate how many tasks the earliest tools performed, and no single category of evidence captures their full range. This is why the phrase first toolmaker can mislead. Animals manipulated objects long before Homo habilis. Modern chimpanzees select stones with suitable weight and mechanical properties for cracking hard foods, showing that choosing material is not a trivial act. Earlier hominins may also have used wood, bone, or unmodified stone in ways archaeology rarely preserves. The threshold was probably not the first time a primate picked up an object. It was the repeated shaping of stone, the recognition that a blow at the right angle could create a useful edge, and the persistence of that knowledge across generations. By around 2.75 million years ago in the Turkana Basin, early Oldowan technology appears not as a brief experiment, but as a stable practice surviving major environmental change for hundreds of thousands of years. This does not mean every flake was elegant or every strike carefully planned. Many cores look rough, but simplicity is not randomness. A useful flake requires choices which stone to select, where to strike it, how to hold it, how much force to apply, and when to stop. These choices can be learned, repeated, and made part of a group's way of life. Once that happens, the landscape changes in meaning. A riverbank is no longer only water and shade. It may also be a source of good stone. A feeding place is no longer valuable only for what is eaten there. It may be worth returning to with tools carried from elsewhere. A cobble found far from food can become a future cutting edge. Stone creates connections across distance. It asks a hominin to remember where material comes from, where it will be useful, and how long it is worth carrying. None of this proves that Homo habilis alone possessed such abilities. The evidence remains incomplete, and the makers often disappear behind their tools. Fossils and artifacts are rarely found in a neat arrangement that identifies a hand beyond doubt. At some sites, Oldowan tools occur near Paranthropus remains. At others, early Homo is a plausible candidate. More than one lineage may have learned similar techniques. The first million years of stone technology may therefore be a braided story rather than a single line. Within that braided story, Homo habilis becomes visible not as a sudden inventor, but as one participant in a profound transformation. Stone adds an artificial edge to a body without claws. It turns memory into access. It allows a small hominin to reach nutrients protected by skin, tendon, shell, or bone. With every repeated strike, the boundary between anatomy and technology becomes less clear. The hand still belongs to the animal. The cutting edge does not. Yet together they form a new survival system, one in which objects outside the body begin to perform the work of teeth and nails. Long before cities, writing, fire-making traditions, or agriculture, this partnership takes shape beside African rivers and lakes. The stone remains after its maker is gone. The edge survives the hand, and in that survival, the first clues to a changing human world begin to accumulate. The stones survived first. Long before anyone knew the shape of the hands that struck them, crude cores and sharp flakes were already emerging from the sediments of East Africa. They appeared among fossil bones, volcanic ash, ancient lake deposits, and the hardened remains of vanished landscapes. For archaeologists, this created an unsettling imbalance. The technology was visible, but its maker was not. Somewhere behind the cutting edges stood a hominin capable of choosing stone, controlling force, and returning again and again to the same basic method. Yet the identity of that hominin remained buried. One of the places where the mystery gathered most power was Oldowan Gorge in northern Tanzania. The gorge cuts through layer after layer of ancient ground, exposing a deep record of changing environments and extinct life. Here, erosion has done what no excavation could accomplish alone. It has opened windows into former lake margins, stream channels, grasslands, and volcanic surfaces laid down over immense spans of time. Fossils weather out of slopes. Stone tools appear where the earth has been stripped back. Each exposed layer is a fragment of a world that existed and disappeared long before the first written history. Louis and Mary Leakey spent years working through this difficult terrain. Their search was not simply for old bones, but for evidence that Africa held a central place in the story of human origins. At the time, that idea was not universally accepted. European and Asian fossils occupied much of the scientific imagination, and the earliest chapters of humanity remained uncertain. Oldowan offered a chance to place tools, animals, environments, and hominin fossils within the same geological sequence. But the work demanded patience. Seasons passed with discoveries that were important yet incomplete fragments of skull, isolated teeth, animal bones bearing possible marks, and thousands of stone artifacts whose makers remained anonymous. Then, in 1959, Mary Leakey discovered the remarkably preserved skull of a robust hominin at Oldowan. It had enormous chewing teeth, heavy jaws, and a powerful crest for anchoring chewing muscles. The fossil was initially named Zinjanthropus boisei, and is now generally placed within Paranthropus boisei. Its discovery was spectacular, and because stone tools occurred in the surrounding deposits, it was tempting to imagine that this powerful-jawed creature had made them. For a brief time, the association seemed to offer a solution. The toolmaker might have been found. But Oldowan did not remain that simple. More fossils appeared, and they did not all belong to the same kind of hominin. Among them were pieces of a smaller, more lightly built individual from a site known as FK North. The most important collection, catalogued as OH7, included parts of a lower jaw, teeth, fragments of the skull, and hand bones. It belonged to a young individual and dated to roughly 1.8 million years ago. Though incomplete, the remains seemed different from the robust Paranthropus skull that had dominated attention only a few years earlier. The hand bones became especially suggestive. They were not modern, and the reconstruction of their function was never straightforward. But they appeared capable of forms of precision gripping useful in manipulating objects. The teeth were smaller than those of Paranthropus. Estimates of brain size, though based on fragmented material, suggested a somewhat larger brain than was typical for Australopiths. Piece by piece, the fossil seemed to occupy an uncertain anatomical space not fully like later humans, but different enough from known Australopiths to provoke a new interpretation. Louis Leakey worked with the anatomist John Napier and the paleoanthropologist Philip Tobias to describe the material. In 1964 they introduced a new species, Homo Habilis. The name meant handy human or able human, reflecting the proposed connection between the fossils and the Oldowan tools. The naming carried an argument within it. By placing the species in Homo rather than Australopithecus, the researchers suggested that it stood near the beginning of the human genus, and that its hands, brain, teeth, and presumed technology formed part of a significant evolutionary threshold. This was a powerful idea. It seemed to give the scattered stone artifacts a face, or at least the partial outline of one. The rough tools of Oldowan could now be imagined in the hands of a small early human whose very name commemorated technical ability. The discovery helped establish an enduring picture Homo Habilis as the first maker, the creature that crossed from an older ape-like condition into a distinctly human world through the controlled shaping of stone. Yet almost every part of that picture would become contested. Some researchers questioned whether the fossils assigned to Homo habilis were sufficiently different from Australopithecus to justify placing them in Homo. Others argued that the collection grouped together remains from more than one species. Brain size estimates varied. Hand function proved more complicated than early descriptions suggested. Later discoveries revealed a wide range of body forms among early Homo, while the oldest known deliberately flaked stone tools were pushed farther and farther back in time, well before the appearance of the classic Homo habilis fossils. Even at Oldowan, the association between one fossil and one tool tradition could not be made secure. Stone artifacts and hominin remains may occur in the same broad sedimentary deposits, without proving that the species represented by the bones manufactured the tools. A landscape can preserve the activities of several creatures over time. A jaw found near flakes does not retain the identity of the hand that struck them. Paranthropus, once set aside as merely a powerful chewer, could not be excluded so easily. Other forms of early Homo were entering the record as well. The discovery of OH7 therefore solved one mystery while creating several others. It provided a name that organized a confusing set of fossils. It gave researchers a candidate for the maker of the Oldowan. It helped shift the search for human beginnings firmly toward Africa. But it also placed enormous weight on fragments from a young individual whose complete body remained unknown. That incompleteness matters. A species cannot be understood from a jaw and several hand bones alone. Yet for decades Homo habilis was reconstructed from precisely this kind of scattered evidence. Additional fossils from East and Southern Africa expanded the sample, but they also increased the variation. Some skulls appeared larger-brained, some faces looked more primitive, certain jaws were difficult to fit comfortably within the same species. The category became both essential and unstable, useful for discussing an early phase of Homo, but difficult to define at its edges. The name itself continued shaping expectations. Once called handy, the species seemed destined to be interpreted through tools. Every detail of the hand invited connection to flake production. Every increase in brain size appeared to support technical planning. But names can preserve old confidence long after evidence becomes more cautious. Homo habilis may indeed have made and used Oldowan implements. It is one of the strongest candidates in several regions and periods. What cannot be sustained is the idea that it alone invented the tradition, or that every early stone artifact belongs to its lineage. Still, the importance of Oldowan does not diminish when certainty is removed. It becomes richer. The gorge reveals that early human evolution was not a clean succession in which one species replaced another and inherited a single technological achievement. Different hominins overlapped. Robust and lightly built forms shared landscapes. Tools persisted across environmental changes and biological boundaries. The sediments preserve not a coronation, but a crowded experiment. Out of that experiment, Homo habilis emerges in fragments: a jaw from one place, a skull from another, hand bones from a young individual, and later pieces of limbs that complicate the old image. the discovery was never the unveiling of a complete ancestor. It was the beginning of a reconstruction that remains unfinished. In the dust of Oldowan, the handy human acquired a name before science fully understood its body. The tools made the name seem inevitable. The fossils made the story possible. But between the stone edge and the hand that shaped it lies a gap that excavation has never completely closed. That gap is where Homo habilis continues to live not as the confirmed first inventor, but as one of the most important figures in the moment when technology began leaving a durable shadow beside the human family. Once Homo habilis had a name, the next problem was deciding which fossils belonged beneath it. That might sound like a matter of sorting bones into labeled drawers, but the remains did not arrive as complete skeletons. They appeared as isolated teeth, crushed skull fragments, partial jaws, pieces of hands, and scattered limb bones separated by distance, time, and the accidents of burial. The species had to be assembled from individuals who had never stood together in life, and from body parts that often did not overlap. A face from one site might be compared with a hand from another. A jaw from a young individual might define the species, while an adult skull discovered years later reshaped the diagnosis. Homo habilis became less like a portrait and more like a mosaic, whose pieces did not always seem to come from the same image. The original specimen, O7, already contained this difficulty. It belonged to a juvenile, so its anatomy had not reached full adult form. Its jaw was distorted. Its skull existed only in fragments. The hand bones were important, but incomplete, and their functional meaning had to be inferred from shape rather than observed in motion. Yet this young individual became the reference point against which later fossils were judged. Every new jaw, tooth, or cranial fragment had to be compared with an anatomical standard that was itself damaged and immature. More fossils soon entered the discussion. At Oldowan, a crushed skull known as OH24 was recovered in a condition that seemed almost designed to test the patience of reconstruction. Nicknamed Twiggy, it had been flattened and broken after burial. Researchers spent long periods removing mineral deposits and fitting the fragments together. When reconstructed, the skull revealed a relatively small face and a brain case larger than those of many Australopiths, though still far below the size typical of modern humans. It offered something OH7 could not: a more recognizable adult head. But the act of rebuilding it also introduced uncertainty. When a fossil is crushed, even careful reconstruction involves judgments about how fragments align, how much distortion occurred, and what the original proportions may have been. At Kubifora in northern Kenya, another skull added further complexity. KNM-ER 18113 was small, with a modest brain case and a face that retained primitive features. It became one of the best-known specimens commonly attributed to Homo habilis. Its relatively complete cranium made it invaluable, but its small size raised questions. Was it simply a small individual? Perhaps female? Did it represent normal variation within the species? Or did the early Homo sample contain more than one kind of hominin? Nearby, a very different skull had been found, KNM-ER 1470. Its brain case was larger, its face broader and flatter, and its teeth differed in ways that made it difficult to fit comfortably beside KNM-ER 18113. For a time, both were often discussed within a broad Homo habilis category. Later, many researchers separated the larger-faced form as Homo rudolfensis. Even that classification remains debated, but the split revealed a deeper problem. Early Homo was more diverse than the original story had allowed. The fossils did not arrange themselves into a neat sequence from small-brained Australopith to larger-brained human. Several anatomical combinations existed at roughly overlapping times. Teeth complicated matters further. They are among the most durable parts of the skeleton and often survive when little else does. Their size, enamel thickness, root form, and wear can provide clues about diet and evolutionary relationships. Yet teeth are also variable. Males and females may differ. Individuals from separate populations may not look identical. Growth, age, and wear can obscure original form. A jaw with relatively small molars might appear more human-like, while another specimen with broader teeth could seem closer to Australopiths. The temptation is to draw firm boundaries, but fossil species do not arrive with biological labels attached. The same uncertainty follows the hand. Early descriptions emphasized features thought to support precision gripping, helping justify the name habilis. But a hand capable of manipulating small objects is not automatically the hand of a habitual stone napper, and no single bone can reveal the full range of movement. Some finger bones preserve curvature associated with climbing. Thumb proportions suggest useful control, but not a modern hand. The anatomy points toward a creature that could grip, strike, carry, and manipulate, while still retaining traits inherited from ancestors that spent significant time above the ground. Feet and lower limbs are even more sparsely represented. A partial skeleton from Oldowan, 062, brought parts of the arms and legs into the debate. Its small body and apparently long arms seemed unlike the tall, long-legged form associated with Homo erectus. Yet 062 was fragmentary and distorted, and estimates of limb proportions depended on reconstruction. Some researchers saw it as confirmation that Homo habilis retained an Australopith-like body. Others warned that too much was being inferred from too little bone. The discovery of KNM-ER 64061 at Ilere, Kenya, has made this question clearer without making it simple. Dating to just over 2 million years ago, it preserves more of the body than any other postcranial skeleton attributed to Homo habilis. Even so, it is far from complete. It includes portions of the shoulder region, arms, pelvis, and other skeletal elements, but not an intact skull joined to the body. Its assignment to Homo habilis depends on anatomical comparison and geological context, rather than the luxury of a complete skeleton with every identifying feature in place. What it suggests is striking. The individual was small. The arms were relatively long and powerfully built, especially when compared with the proportions of Homo erectus. The body did not resemble a miniature modern human. It carried a mixture of adaptations that may have supported effective movement on the ground, while preserving substantial upper body strength, useful in climbing or negotiating broken terrain. The fossil narrows the gap between scattered limbs and the species name, yet scholars still debate how confidently such remains can be assigned when cranial evidence is absent. This is the central difficulty of reconstructing Homo habilis. The skull and the body are often known from different individuals. The fossils span hundreds of thousands of years. They come from multiple regions. Some are juveniles, others adults. Some may represent females and others males. Geological pressure has altered their shapes. Carnivores, water, and erosion have separated bones from their original contexts. The resulting sample may contain normal variation, regional variation, evolutionary change through time, or more than one species. No single explanation fully accounts for every difference. Modern technology has improved the process. Digital scans allow crushed fossils to be virtually separated and reassembled. Comparative databases make it possible to measure subtle differences across large samples. Geological dating places fossils more accurately within time. Yet better tools do not remove the basic limitation. The evidence remains incomplete. A virtual reconstruction is still a reconstruction. A statistical cluster is still an interpretation of a small and uneven sample. Popular images often give Homo habilis one stable face and body, as though an artist had observed it alive. In reality, every reconstruction is a negotiated result. The brow may be based on one skull, the jaw on another, the body proportions on a partial skeleton, and the skin, hair, and posture on informed comparison with living primates and later hominins. Such images are useful, but they can conceal how much uncertainty lies beneath the surface. What survives in the record suggests a real and distinctive population of early Homo, but its boundaries remain blurred. Homo habilis may be one variable species spread across changing environments. It may represent a narrower group surrounded by fossils that belong elsewhere. Some specimens may eventually be reassigned as new discoveries provide better comparisons. The name endures because it captures an important anatomical and behavioral stage, even if the collection beneath that name continues to shift. The creature reconstructed from these fragments is therefore not a single fossil brought back to life. It is a scientific argument built from broken evidence. A tooth supports one part of the argument. A hand bone supports another. A crushed skull changes the proportions. A partial skeleton challenges the old body plan. Each discovery fills a gap and opens another. Homo habilis remains visible through this imperfect assembly, small-bodied, relatively large-brained for its time, technically capable, and still marked by a deep evolutionary past. But before its anatomy can tell a larger story, one fact must remain in view. The species we imagine walking beside those ancient lakes is not preserved whole anywhere. It exists between the fragments, in the careful space where bone ends and interpretation begins. Homo habilis occupies one of the most uncomfortable positions in the human family tree. It is too human-like to sit easily among the Australopiths, yet too primitive to resemble the later members of Homo that spread across continents. Its skull hints at expansion. Its teeth suggest change. Its hands appear increasingly capable, but its body retains long arms, powerful upper limbs, and proportions that pull it back toward an older way of life. The species seems to stand at a threshold, but thresholds in evolution are rarely clean lines. They are broad zones where old and new traits coexist, sometimes for hundreds of thousands of years. For much of the 20th century, human evolution was often presented as a gradual ascent. Australopithecus stood below, Homo habilis above it, Homo erectus higher still, and modern humans at the summit. In that arrangement, Homo habilis served as the bridge, the first creature with a larger brain, smaller teeth, and enough manual skill to deserve entry into the genus Homo. The model was easy to understand. It was also too tidy. The fossils resist a simple ladder. Homo habilis does show changes that matter. Its brain case is generally larger than those of many earlier Australopiths, though there is considerable overlap. Its face is less massively built than that of Paranthropus. Its molars are reduced compared with the enormous grinding teeth of robust hominins. Some cranial specimens suggest a shortening of the face and a reorganization of the skull. These features point toward later Homo, but none arrives fully developed. The brain remains small by modern standards. The face still projects forward. The brow and cranial vault preserve a distinctly ancient appearance. The body deepens the contradiction. Later Homo erectus is associated with long legs, a narrower pelvis, and a body well suited to sustained walking across open ground. Homo habilis appears different. The new evidence from KNM-ER 64061 reinforces the impression of a small-bodied hominin with relatively long, strong arms. The shoulder and upper limb suggest that climbing remained important, even if the species also moved habitually on two legs. It was not simply an upright ape, but neither was it a scaled-down version of Homo erectus. Its body carried two worlds at once. This combination may reflect a flexible life in a fragmented landscape. Trees still offered food, sleeping sites, shade, and protection from some predators. The ground offered carcasses, stones, roots, and wider movement between resource patches. A body capable of exploiting both zones could be advantageous where habitats changed rapidly. Long arms and upper body strength were not evolutionary leftovers without purpose. They may have remained useful tools in their own right. Yet the mixture creates a taxonomic problem. What should define the genus Homo if brain size is emphasized? Homo habilis fits better than many Australopiths, but only marginally in some cases. If body proportions are emphasized, it appears more primitive. If tool use is treated as decisive, the category becomes unstable because stone tools predate the known species and may have been made by other hominins. If diet is central, the evidence points toward flexibility rather than one clear boundary. Every proposed definition seems to include fossils some researchers would exclude, or exclude fossils others consider important. Some scholars have therefore argued that Homo habilis belongs more comfortably within Australopithecus. From this perspective, the name Homo was extended too far backward because researchers were eager to identify the beginning of humanity. The species may represent a late Australopith with a slightly larger brain and a broader behavioral repertoire, not a true member of the human genus. Others defend its placement in Homo, emphasizing changes in cranial form, dentition, hand function, and behavior that collectively mark a meaningful shift. The disagreement is not merely about terminology. It reflects different ideas about what makes a human ancestor human. Is it the brain, the hand, the foot, the diet, the ability to reshape stone, or is Homo defined by a package of traits that only becomes clear later? With Homo erectus, no single answer has gained complete agreement because evolution does not produce categories for the convenience of museums. Species change gradually, populations vary, and multiple lineages can experiment with similar adaptations at the same time. The split between Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis illustrates this difficulty. Some early Homo skulls are small and lightly built. Others have larger faces and different dental proportions. Grouping them together creates an extremely variable species. Separating them creates new species based on a limited fossil record. Both approaches carry risk. Too much splitting can turn individual or regional variation into separate species. Too much lumping can hide genuine diversity. Sexual differences add another layer. If males and females differed substantially in body size or facial form, some fossils that appear distinct may belong to one species. But the degree of sexual dimorphism in Homo habilis is uncertain because the sample is too small and fragmented. Age also matters. Juveniles do not resemble adults in every proportion. Fossils separated by several 100,000 years may represent evolutionary change within a lineage rather than different species. The record is not simply incomplete. It is uneven in ways that complicate every comparison. Even the transition from Homo habilis to Homo erectus refuses to behave like a clean replacement. The two may have overlapped in East Africa. If so, Homo erectus did not simply evolve after Homo habilis had vanished. They shared parts of the same world. One was taller, longer-legged, and more modern in body form. The other remained smaller and more primitive. Their coexistence suggests branching, competition, or ecological separation rather than a single population gradually transforming in place. This overlap also changes how tools are interpreted. Oldowan technology continues into periods when several hominins are present. More advanced Acheulean hand axes appear later, but even then older flake-based strategies remain in use. Technology does not map neatly onto species. A more modern body does not automatically produce a new tool tradition, and a primitive body does not imply primitive behavior. Cultural habits can persist because they work. Different species may share or independently discover similar techniques. Homo habilis therefore becomes important precisely because it refuses simplicity. Its anatomy shows that the emergence of Homo was not a sudden event. Brain expansion did not arrive at the same moment as long legs. Precision handling did not erase climbing adaptations. Dietary flexibility did not remove powerful jaws overnight. Evolution assembled the later human condition piece by piece, and those pieces did not always appear together. There is a temptation to look backward and identify the trait that mattered most. Perhaps larger brains began the transition. Perhaps stone tools altered diet. Perhaps more flexible movement across changing landscapes favored new kinds of memory and cooperation. But the evidence suggests feedback rather than a single cause. A slightly more capable hand makes tools more useful. Tools broaden diet. Improved nutrition may support expensive brain tissue. A larger brain improves learning and planning. Better planning changes movement. New patterns of movement create further pressure on the body. Each change reshapes the value of the others. What emerges is not a straight line but a loop between anatomy, behavior, and environment. Homo habilis stands inside that loop. It is not fully committed to the ground, yet it is no longer limited to inherited anatomy. It cannot run across open country like later humans, but it can carry an edge sharper than any tooth. Its brain is modest, yet its technology persists within a cultural tradition lasting far beyond one lifetime. The species may never fit perfectly into the categories built around it. That may be the most honest way to understand it. Homo habilis is neither simply Australopith nor recognizably modern human. It is a reminder that the boundaries between them were lived by real creatures whose bodies contained contradictions. In those contradictions lies the beginning of a new, evolutionary pattern, not the abandonment of the past, but the gradual recruitment of objects, memory, and learned behavior into the work of survival. The body of Homo habilis makes more sense when placed back into the landscape that shaped it. Not a single landscape, but a restless patchwork of lake margins, wooded corridors, open grasslands, volcanic plains, riverbanks, marshes, and dry ground where water might vanish for months. East Africa, between roughly 2.4 and 1.5 million years ago, is not a stable stage beneath an evolutionary procession. It is an active force. Lakes rise and contract. Rivers cut new channels. Ash falls from distant eruptions. Grasslands expand, then retreat as rainfall patterns shift. Forest survives in fragments, sometimes close enough to reach in a day, sometimes separated by exposed ground filled with heat and predators. For a small hominin, these changes are not background. They determine where food can be found, where shade remains, where stone lies exposed, and which routes can be crossed without entering open danger. Homo habilis does not dominate this world. It survives within it by reading signals that leave no fossil of their own cloud movement. Animal calls, the smell of water, the flight of scavenging birds, the freshness of tracks, the appearance of new shoots after rain. The evidence remains incomplete, but the anatomy and archaeological record together suggest a creature that depended on flexibility more than specialization. Along the edges of ancient lakes, resources gather densely. Reeds shelter birds and small animals. Fish and turtles inhabit shallows. Grazers approach to drink. Carnivores follow them. Seasonal flooding deposits mud, plant matter, and stone. A fallen tree may provide food, cover, or a safer sleeping place. A drying pool concentrates animals and creates opportunity, but it also becomes a trap where predators wait. Every rich place is dangerous precisely because so many species recognize its value. The mammal communities surrounding early Homo are larger and more varied than those of the same regions today. Several kinds of elephants move through the basin. Hippos occupy rivers and lakes. Giant pigs, antelopes, equids, giraffids, and bovids fill different ecological niches. Some graze open country. Others browse among shrubs and woodland margins. Their abundance leaves bones across the landscape, but most carcasses are not freely available. A dead animal becomes an arena. Vultures announce it from the air. Hyenas can crush limbs and digest bone. Big cats may defend a kill or return after resting. Saber-toothed predators, now extinct, add another danger that no living African landscape exactly reproduces. Homo habilis lacks the speed of many grazers and the weapons of the carnivores. Its teeth can process food, but they cannot compete with a hyena's bone-crushing bite. Its hands can grip, yet its fingernails offer little defense. Survival depends on timing, group awareness, and the ability to use brief openings. A carcass abandoned by a cat may offer flesh for only a short interval. A limb separated from the main body may be carried away. A stone flake can remove meat quickly, where teeth alone would lose valuable time. But animal tissue is only one part of the diet. Plants almost certainly remain essential. Underground storage organs, fruit, seeds, leaves, soft stems, nuts, and other seasonal foods would have offered carbohydrates and micronutrients. Many of these resources are invisible archaeologically because they decay without leaving distinctive traces. Stone tools may have been used in plant processing, but plant residues rarely survive from such great age. The record therefore risks making meat look more important simply because cut-marked bone lasts longer than a crushed tuber. This imbalance must be kept in view. Homo habilis was probably not a specialized hunter roaming the plains in pursuit of large prey. It was more likely an adaptable forager that combined plant foods, small animals, insects, eggs, aquatic resources, and occasional access to larger carcasses. Scholars still debate the balance between hunting and scavenging, and different groups may have used different strategies depending on season and place. No single diet fully accounts for the variety of habitats in which early Homo remains and Oldowan tools appear. The landscape also contains competitors closer to Homo habilis itself. Paranthropus boisei moves through many of the same regions. Its massive molars, thick enamel, broad face, and powerful chewing apparatus once encouraged the image of a specialist living mainly on hard foods. Microscopic wear and chemical evidence have complicated that picture, suggesting a diet that may have included large amounts of grasses, sedges, or related resources rather than constant nut cracking. Whatever its exact diet, Paranthropus is not simply an evolutionary failure waiting to disappear. It survives for a long time and succeeds in environments shared with early Homo. This coexistence changes the meaning of adaptation. Homo habilis does not need to be better at everything. It only needs to exploit resources differently enough to persist. Flexible food processing, stone transport, access to animal tissue, and movement between habitat zones may have created a distinct way of life. Paranthropus invested heavily in anatomy. Homo habilis may have relied more on behavior and external tools. The contrast should not be exaggerated, because Paranthropus may also have used tools, and Homo habilis still depended greatly on its teeth and body. Yet the possibility of different adaptive strategies within the same landscape is central to understanding why several hominin forms could coexist. Woodland patches remain particularly important. The long, strong arms suggested by the postcranial skeleton of Homo habilis make little sense in a story that places it permanently on open grassland. Trees offer more than climbing practice. They provide fruit, leaves, shelter, lookout points, and possible refuge from some ground predators. At night, elevation may reduce certain risks, though climbing in darkness carries dangers of its own. The species likely moves through a three-dimensional environment, alternating between upright travel on the ground and strong upper limb use where branches or steep terrain make it valuable. Open spaces demand a different set of decisions. Crossing them exposes a small body to heat and visibility. Water must be located. Shade becomes a resource. Carrying food or stone creates a trade-off between future benefit and immediate effort. A cobble useful for flaking adds weight, but reaching a feeding site without suitable stone could mean losing access to protected tissue. These pressures help transform movement into something more than wandering. Routes begin to connect different kinds of places: water, food, shelter, raw material, and known danger. Recent evidence from Oldowan sites suggests that hominins sometimes transported preferred stone into areas where suitable raw material was scarce. That behavior does not require a modern mental map, but it does imply that locations held remembered value. Some places offered biological resources, others supplied stone with useful fracture properties. The two might be separated by distance. Carrying material between them created a new geography built from practical knowledge. Volcanism adds another layer. East Africa's rift system produces eruptions that can devastate local environments while preserving them for science. Ash buries surfaces, alters drainage, and leaves datable layers that allow researchers to place fossils and tools within time. For the hominins living there, an eruption would have meant dust, darkness, damaged vegetation, displaced animals, and unfamiliar routes. Yet over longer periods, volcanic processes also created basins, soils, stone exposures, and water systems that made the region productive. The same geology that threatened life helped preserve its traces. Seasons sharpen every challenge. During wetter periods, plant foods may be abundant and animals dispersed. During dry periods, water sources concentrate life and increase competition. Foods that are easy to obtain in one month may vanish in another. A flexible forager benefits from knowing many resources rather than depending on one. Stone tools expand that flexibility because they open foods otherwise difficult to process. Their value rises precisely when familiar options fail. This does not mean technology freed Homo habilis from the environment. It tied the species to the landscape in a new way. Useful stone had to be found. Skills had to be practiced. Safe places had to be remembered. Carcasses had to be approached at the right moment. Trees, water, and shade remained essential. The toolmaker was not master of the world, but a more intricate participant within it. What survives in the record suggests that early Homo endured by linking separate opportunities. A sharp flake connected a stone source to a carcass. A remembered route connected woodland shelter to open feeding ground. A small body moved between branches and earth. A changing climate rewarded those able to shift behavior before anatomy could change. In this world, survival did not belong automatically to the strongest jaws or the largest brain. It belonged, for a time, to creatures capable of assembling solutions from whatever the landscape provided. Homo habilis carried no permanent shelter and controlled no territory in the later human sense, yet it began to turn places into networks and objects into extensions of possibility. The world remained dangerous, fragmented, and indifferent, but it was no longer merely endured. Piece by piece, it was being interpreted. A useful stone begins as a problem in the hand. It may be too smooth, too rounded, too brittle, or too heavy. Some rocks shatter unpredictably. Others absorb a blow without producing a sharp edge. The early makers of Oldowan tools are not merely striking whatever lies nearby. They are learning, through repeated contact, that stone has character. Basalt behaves differently from quartz. Lava cobbles fracture differently from fine-grained volcanic rock. A piece that looks suitable may fail after the first strike, while another opens along a clean surface and produces an edge sharp enough to cut hide. The basic process appears simple. One stone serves as a core, another is used as a hammer. A blow lands near an edge rather than in the center. If the angle and force are sufficient, a flake detaches. The result may be a cutting tool, while the core itself may retain sharp ridges useful for chopping or scraping. But simplicity at this scale is deceptive. The hand must stabilize the core without placing fingers in the path of impact. The wrist must control direction. The maker must judge whether another strike will improve the edge or destroy it. Each action occurs quickly, but it rests on knowledge accumulated through failure. A badly placed blow can crush the striking platform, split the core uselessly, or send fragments in an unexpected direction. A successful blow produces more than a broken rock. It creates a curved fracture surface, a sharp margin, and a piece whose form reflects the mechanics of impact. Archaeologists recognize these features because deliberate flaking leaves, patterns that ordinary geological breakage does not usually reproduce. The scars on a core record earlier removals. The bulb of percussion on a flake marks the transmission of force. Angles, ridges, and impact points preserve a brief sequence of movement long after the maker has vanished. Even so, identifying an artifact is not always straightforward. Stone can be broken by rivers, trampling animals, falling rock, or geological pressure. Once buried, its surface may be polished, scratched, stained, or chemically altered. Recent work on Oldowan assemblages from the Shungara Formation has emphasized how much post-burial processes can modify tool surfaces. This matters because a mark interpreted as use-wear may instead come from sediment, transport, or contact with other stones. Archaeologists must separate the trace of ancient behavior from the damage imposed by 2 million years underground. Where the evidence is secure, Oldowan technology reveals a practical system rather than a single object type. The familiar image is a rounded core with several flakes removed, but the most valuable products may often have been the flakes themselves. A fresh flake can be extraordinarily sharp. Its edge may slice skin, muscle, plant fiber, or connective tissue more effectively than the maker's teeth. It does not need to be symmetrical or beautiful. Its value lies in what it can do immediately. Some flakes are used and abandoned within minutes. Others may be carried. Cores can be reduced repeatedly until their useful angles disappear. Hammerstones become battered after repeated impacts, at certain sites. The entire sequence survives raw material, cores, detached flakes, fragments, and damaged pounding stones. At others, only selected pieces are present, suggesting that stone was transported into or out of the area. These differences allow archaeologists to reconstruct decisions about where tools were made, where they were used, and which materials were worth carrying. The Oldowan was once treated as a nearly static and crude industry, as though its makers had discovered one elementary trick and repeated it without much thought. That view has weakened. The tools remain simple compared with later hand axes or prepared core technologies, but early assemblages show purposeful selection and persistence. At Namorotukunen in the Turkana Basin, Oldowan technology endured through roughly 300,000 years of environmental change. River systems shifted, vegetation altered, local conditions became wetter or drier. Yet hominins continued producing sharp flakes through a recognizable technological strategy. This continuity is surprising. A habit lasting hundreds of thousands of years is not the memory of one clever individual. It must be learned repeatedly by generation after generation. The exact method of transmission is unknown. There is no evidence for formal teaching in the later human sense, and scholars still debate how much imitation, observation, practice, or active guidance was involved. But the stability of the technology suggests that young or inexperienced individuals had opportunities to watch others handle stone and to reproduce successful actions. The process may have been noisy and visible. Stone knapping creates distinctive sounds. Flakes scatter around the maker. Failed attempts lie beside successful ones. A group member does not need complex spoken instructions to notice that certain grips, angles, and materials produce better results. Repeated exposure can turn individual discovery into shared behavior. Over time, a technique becomes part of how a group uses a place. Yet the hands performing these actions cannot usually be identified by species. This is the unresolved center of the Oldowan story. Homo habilis is strongly associated with the tradition because its fossils overlap in time and place with many Oldowan sites, and because its hand anatomy appears capable of controlled manipulation. But association is not authorship. The oldest stone technologies precede the known range of Homo habilis. Oldowan tools appear in contexts where other hominins lived. Early Homo includes more than one possible species, while Paranthropus boisei remains a serious candidate at some sites. Nyaya makes the uncertainty especially vivid. There, very early Oldowan artifacts occur beside animal bones bearing evidence of processing and near teeth attributed to Paranthropus. The remains do not prove that Paranthropus made the tools. A tooth and a flake can enter the same sediment without belonging to the same event, but the association is enough to prevent easy dismissal. The massive-jawed hominin once cast as the opposite of the tool-dependent Homo may also have selected, carried, or shaped stone. This possibility disrupts the old evolutionary fable in which one lineage turns toward intelligence while another becomes trapped by specialization. Paranthropus possesses powerful chewing anatomy, but that does not mean it lacked behavioral flexibility. Homo habilis has a somewhat larger brain and lighter teeth, but that does not grant it exclusive ownership of technology. Several hominins may have used stone differently, for different tasks, or with different levels of dependence. The Oldowan may record a shared behavioral horizon rather than the signature of one species. There's also the older Lomequian tradition, dating to around 3.3 million years ago. Its artifacts are generally larger and may reflect heavier pounding and different methods of fracture. Whether it led directly to the older one remains debated, The technological gap between sites is large, and the fossil makers are unknown. Still, Lomekwi shows that deliberate stone modification began before the genus Homo is securely documented. The first million years of technology therefore cannot be reduced to a single invention or inventor. What changes with the Oldowan is not merely that stone breaks, it is that flaking becomes reliable, repeatable, and widely useful. The edge enters daily foraging. Material is selected in advance. Some stones are transported away from their source. Tool production survives climatic shifts and appears across broad regions. The technology becomes resilient enough to outlast particular individuals, local environments, and perhaps even the species that first practiced it. For Homo Habilis, this is the world of stone it inherits and helps sustain. It may not have created the tradition from nothing, but its body, diet, and movement become entangled with it. A hand that once depended mainly on inherited anatomy now carries a detachable edge. A mouth no longer needs to perform every stage of food processing. A carcass too tough to open becomes accessible. A plant too fibrous to tear may be cut or pounded. A place without suitable rock becomes a reason to carry stone from elsewhere. The tool remains modest, a flake small enough to disappear beneath dust, a core easily mistaken for rubble by an untrained eye. Yet its consequences are larger than its shape. It allows force to be stored in form. One successful strike creates an edge that can be used later, in another place, against another material. The maker begins acting not only on the present object, but on a future need. No single artifact proves foresight, culture, or human-like intelligence. The evidence does not permit such certainty, but taken together, the recurring patterns reveal a new relationship between mind and matter. Stone is selected because of what it may become. It is altered because an unseen task lies ahead. It is carried because one place can supply what another lacks. Homo habilis stands within this relationship, not as a solitary inventor illuminated against an empty plain, but as one member of a diverse hominin world learning that survival can be manufactured. The edge is artificial, but its effects are biological. It changes what the hand can accomplish, what the mouth must do, where the body travels, and which foods can be claimed before competitors arrive. Stone has not yet built a shelter or raised a monument. It has done something more fundamental. It has begun to reshape the daily limits of the animal holding it. The transformation does not begin with a modern hand. Homo habilis carries an anatomy shaped by a long history of climbing, gripping branches, supporting body weight, and moving through uneven spaces. The fingers are not simply miniature versions of ours, and the thumb does not operate within a fully modern wrist. Yet the hand has entered a new mechanical relationship with the world. It can close around a hammerstone, stabilize a core, rotate an object, adjust pressure, and repeat a blow with enough control to detach a useful flake. The significance lies not in one perfect grasp, but in the combination of strength, sensitivity, and timing. A stone strike begins in the shoulder. Force passes through the upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, and fingers before reaching the hammer. The long, strong arms suggested by fossils such as KNM ER 64061 are therefore not irrelevant remnants from an arboreal past. They may have supplied leverage and stability during pounding, carrying, climbing, and food processing. The same upper body power useful for pulling across branches could be redirected toward holding resistant material or delivering repeated impacts. Evolution rarely discards an old structure and replaces it with a completely new one. It changes the work that existing structures can perform. The hand must do two different things at once. One hand generates force, the other absorbs and controls it. The hammerstone hand needs a secure grip without becoming rigid. The core hand must hold the stone firmly enough to prevent slipping, while allowing small changes in orientation after each strike. Fingers remain close to a sharp and unpredictable fracture. A successful maker therefore manages not only impact, but risk. A mistake can cut skin, bruise bone, or waste valuable raw material. This does not require a modern craftsperson's precision. Many Oldowan flakes emerge from short sequences of reduction. Cores are not necessarily shaped toward a predetermined final form, but even a simple sequence demands practical knowledge. The maker must recognize an edge suitable for striking, select a surface that will carry force through the stone, and notice when the angle has become poor. After a flake is removed, the core changes. The next decision must respond to a new shape. Toolmaking is therefore not one repeated motion. It is a chain of adjustments. The fossil hand offers clues, but never a complete demonstration. Some bones attributed to Homo Habilis suggest a capable thumb and joints suited to controlled gripping. Others preserve finger curvature associated with climbing. The wrist and fingertips are incompletely known, and different fossils may not all belong to the same species. Scholars still debate how much of the modern human precision grip was present, and whether certain features arose primarily through tool use or through older locomotor demands. What survives in the record supports technical competence, but not a fully modern hand. This distinction matters because the phrase precision grip can create a misleading image. Human hands use several grips rather than one. A small flake may be pinched between thumb and finger. A rounded hammerstone may be held in a power grip across the palm. A core can be braced against the base of the fingers or rotated between strikes. Cutting meat may require a different grip from scraping plant material. The Oldowan hand is valuable because it can shift among tasks, not because it has achieved one ideal configuration. Repeated tool use also changes behavior even when it does not immediately change bone. A hand becomes skilled through practice. Muscles learn to stabilize. Vision becomes linked to movement. The maker begins to recognize how far a blow will travel and how a stone will respond. These abilities are not preserved as fossils, yet they are visible indirectly in the consistency of artifact production. When similar flakes appear again and again across many generations, the pattern suggests bodies trained by repeated action. Learning likely involved long periods of failure. An inexperienced individual may strike too far from the edge, hold the core poorly, or use a stone that crumbles. The sound may be wrong. The stone may vibrate instead of opening. Improvement comes through watching, handling, and trying again. The evidence does not reveal whether experienced individuals deliberately demonstrated techniques, tolerated observation, or simply worked in view of others. No single explanation fully accounts for how the tradition was transmitted. But a stable technology cannot persist unless useful actions are copied with some reliability. Modern experiments help illuminate the difficulty. Researchers reproducing Oldowan tools often find that basic flaking can be learned quickly, but efficient production takes practice. Beginners use more blows and create fewer usable edges. Experienced knappers choose better angles and recover more cutting edge from the same core. These experiments do not recreate ancient minds, but they show that apparent simplicity can conceal motor skill and material judgment. Comparisons with living primates add another layer. wild chimpanzees select hammerstones according to weight, hardness, and task. They may transport suitable stones and reuse favored locations. Their behavior shows that technical selection can exist without human language or modern cognition. Yet chimpanzees do not normally maintain a widespread flake technology like the Oldowan. The comparison narrows the gap without erasing it. For Homo habilis, the hand may have become increasingly important as a place where perception, memory, and force met. The eyes evaluate a surface, the brain estimates a strike, the arm delivers movement, the fingers receive immediate feedback through vibration and resistance. Each blow teaches something about the stone. Toolmaking is not merely the execution of a plan, it is a conversation between body and material, though no words are required. The consequences extend beyond manufacturing. A hand occupied with carrying stone cannot perform every other task at the same time. A useful core may be worth holding during travel, but it competes with food, climbing, balance, and protection. If tools or raw material are carried repeatedly, group movement may begin to organize around who holds what and where objects are placed. Even temporary accumulation at a feeding site can create a shared technical space. Over long periods, repeated reliance on gripping and manipulation may influence selection on the hand and wrist. The relationship is difficult to prove directly because anatomy and behavior evolve together, and many useful features may have originated for climbing. It would be too simple to say that stone tools created the human hand. The hand was already capable before the oldest known artifacts, but once tool use became habitual, it could favor bodies better able to control, carry, and use objects. This is where stone begins to shape the maker in a literal evolutionary sense. The tool extends the hand, but the hand also adapts to the demands of the tool. Skill changes which individuals gain food efficiently. Food changes energy available to the body. Successful behavior becomes worth learning and repeating. A biological limb enters a cultural system. Homo habilis remains small, with arms that still speak of branches and a body that has not committed fully to open country travel. Yet those arms now do more than lift the body. They deliver force into stone. The fingers do more than close around bark. They stabilize an edge that does not exist until the strike creates it. Between inherited anatomy and learned technique, a new kind of capability emerges. The important moment is not when a hand first touches a rock. It is when touch becomes judgment. Force becomes controlled fracture, and the resulting edge becomes part of another task. The hand has begun to transform matter, but matter is also reorganizing the hand's place in survival. From this point onward, human evolution will increasingly occur not only through bones and muscles, but through the objects those bones and muscles learn to make. A sharp edge changes the meaning of food before it changes the body that consumes it. Flesh covered by hide is no longer sealed. Tendons can be cut. Joints can be separated. Bones that teeth cannot open may be struck until the inner cavity gives way. Fibrous plants can be sliced, scraped, or pounded. The importance of Oldowan technology lies partly in this quiet expansion of access. It does not create food where none exists, but it allows a small-bodied hominin to reach nutrients that anatomy alone would make difficult, slow, or impossible to obtain. For Homo habilis, this may have been one of the most consequential advantages of stone. Its teeth are smaller than those of Paranthropus, and its jaws are not built for the same degree of heavy chewing. That does not mean it possessed a weak mouth. It could still process a broad diet, but external cutting and pounding reduce some of the work that teeth must perform. food can begin to be modified before it enters the mouth. In evolutionary terms, part of digestion is moving outside the body. The clearest surviving evidence comes from animal bones. At a number of early sites, researchers find cut marks where flesh was removed, percussion damage where bones were struck, and patterns suggesting that limbs were transported or processed. These traces reveal repeated access to carcasses, though they do not always reveal how the animals died. Some may have been hunted, others may have been scavenged soon after a predator's kill. Still others could have died naturally near water. Scholars still debate the balance between hunting and scavenging, and the answer may have varied greatly by place, season, prey, size, and opportunity. The old image of Homo habilis as a timid scavenger waiting until every predator had finished is probably too simple. So is the opposite image of organized hunters routinely bringing down large animals. A more realistic picture lies between them. Early Homo may have secured small prey directly, captured vulnerable animals when conditions allowed, driven competitors away from limited portions of a carcass, or arrived early enough to recover substantial flesh. At other times, only scraps remained. The archaeological record preserves successful access more readily than failed attempts, so even apparently rich sites represent only a fraction of daily experience. A carcass is valuable because it contains several kinds of food protected by different barriers. Muscle is visible but often claimed first by carnivores. Organs are rich in nutrients yet disappear quickly. Marrow remains sealed inside long bones after much of the meat is gone. Brain tissue lies within the skull. Tendons and connective tissue require cutting. A flake opens the outer layers, a hammerstone opens the harder ones. Marrow is especially important because it is dense in fat. In environments where lean meat may be abundant but fat is limited, marrow offers concentrated energy. Breaking bone also creates access after predators have removed the easiest flesh. Hyenas are highly effective at this. But hominins armed with stones can compete mechanically even without specialized jaws. They do not need to evolve teeth capable of crushing every bone if a hammerstone can perform the task. This does not mean marrow alone fueled brain expansion, or caused the emergence of Homo. Such explanations are attractive because they connect one tool, one nutrient, and one evolutionary outcome. The reality is more complicated. Brain tissue is energetically expensive, but its growth depends on total diet, life history, development, and many other factors. Stone-assisted access to animal foods may have improved dietary quality, yet no single resource explains the full pattern. What survives in the record suggests a broadening niche rather than a sudden dependence on one food. Recent evidence from sites dating between roughly 2 million and 1.6 million years ago points toward a stable but flexible foraging strategy in early Homo. Animal limbs were selected and moved. Bones were opened for marrow. Different carcass parts were processed in ways suggesting more than accidental contact. The pattern implies that animal resources had become a recurring component of survival, not merely a rare emergency meal. Still, the plant side of the diet remains largely hidden. Tubers, bulbs, fruits, seeds, leaves, nuts, bark, and sedges could have supplied much of the daily energy. Insects, eggs, small reptiles, shellfish, and aquatic foods may also have contributed. Many of these resources leave little durable evidence. Stone pounding could break hard plant foods. Sharp flakes could cut stems or peel fibrous material. Scraping might prepare roots. But residues rarely survive for millions of years, and microscopic wear on tool edges can be damaged after burial. This creates a bias in the story. Bones endure, so meat becomes visible. Plants vanish, so they appear less important than they may have been. Archaeologists know this, but the imbalance cannot be fully corrected. The evidence remains incomplete, and any reconstruction of Homo habilis diet must distinguish what is directly preserved from what is ecologically probable. Even so, tool use alters the range of possible foods in a way that matters during environmental instability. When fruit becomes scarce, underground storage organs may remain. When plants dry out, animal tissue may become more valuable. When a carcass is mostly stripped, marrow may still be available. A flexible forager is not tied to one perfect season. Stone increases the number of fallback options. The effect is not only nutritional, it changes the timing of feeding. Teeth process food slowly. Cutting allows portions to be removed quickly, perhaps carried away from the carcass and consumed in a safer place. A limb can be detached before a predator returns. Meat can be divided among individuals. Bones may be transported to locations where hammerstones are available. Food no longer has to be consumed exactly where it is found. That shift creates new social possibilities, though caution is necessary where transported food does not automatically prove sharing in the modern sense. A group may gather around the same resource without equal distribution. Dominance, tolerance, kinship, and competition could all shape access. Yet once food is moved, divided, and processed with tools, feeding becomes more structured than solitary consumption at the point of discovery. A cutting edge also reduces the physical limitations imposed by the mouth. This has led to the idea that tool use and food processing contributed to smaller teeth and jaws over evolutionary time. The relationship is plausible, but difficult to isolate. Dietary changes, cooking in much later periods, developmental patterns, and shifts in food quality all affect craniofacial anatomy. Homo habilis already has somewhat reduced teeth compared with robust hominins, but it cannot be assumed that tools alone produced that difference. The more important point is that anatomy and behavior are becoming substitutes for one another. Paranthropus carries much of its food processing equipment in its skull, broad chewing surfaces, thick enamel, and powerful muscles. Early Homo increasingly carries part of that equipment in the hand. One strategy is built into bone, the other can be dropped, remade, carried, or improved. The contrast should not become a false division. Paranthropus may also have used tools, and Homo habilis still relied heavily on chewing, but stone introduces a level of behavioral flexibility that fixed anatomy cannot match. A tooth is always a tooth. A flake can cut meat in one moment, scrape plant tissue in another, and be discarded when its edge dulls. This flexibility may have influenced which food patches were worth visiting. A carcass several kilometers away becomes more valuable if stone can be brought to it. A place with excellent raw material becomes important even when little food is present. A group may carry unfinished cores, ready flakes, or hammerstones between locations. The search for food and the search for stone begin to merge. Later sites at Oldowan show how far this relationship could develop. By around 1.78 million years ago, hominins were processing the remains of an elephant, using stone tools against an animal whose body offered an enormous quantity of meat and fat. That event belongs to a later and more complex world, close to the rise of Homo erectus and Acheulean technology, and it cannot be assigned directly to Homo habilis. But it reveals the direction opened by the earliest flakes. Once stone gives access to tissue protected by size, skin, and bone, the scale of possible resources expands dramatically. Homo habilis stands near the beginning of that expansion, It does not possess mastery over the carcass landscape. It remains vulnerable to predators, uncertain access, and seasonal shortage. But it can do something its body alone cannot accomplish. It can manufacture sharpness. It can carry crushing force in a stone. It can convert an animal limb, a root, or a hard seed into smaller, more manageable pieces. The evolutionary consequence is not merely that more calories become available. Food itself becomes a technical problem. Where it is found, how it is opened, which tool is needed, and where it can be carried all become linked decisions. Eating is no longer only an act of teeth and stomach. It begins earlier, in the selection of stone and the memory of where an edge will be useful. In that sense, Oldowan technology enters the body without being swallowed. It changes the workload of the jaws, the reach of the hands, the value of movement, and the range of nutrients available in difficult seasons. Stone becomes an artificial tooth that can be replaced when broken and sharpened when needed. And once food is transformed outside the mouth, the path toward a creature increasingly dependent on culture has already begun. A carcass is never simply food. It is a signal moving through the landscape. The scent travels on warm air. Vultures circle above it. Hyenas hear the quarrel of birds. Lions may remain nearby, resting after feeding, but not finished with the kill. Even when the original predator has left, the danger does not disappear. Every animal drawn to the remains is watching every other one, measuring strength, distance, hunger, and the narrow interval before violence begins. Homo habilis enters this space at a disadvantage. It is small, lightly built, and poorly armed. Its canines do not threaten a large carnivore. Its legs are not yet those of a long-distance runner. Its hands are useful, but a stone flake is not an effective defense against a determined cat or a group of hyenas. The safest strategy is not confrontation. It is timing. This may be one reason stone tools matter so much. They allow a hominin to make use of short opportunities. If a predator abandons a carcass temporarily, a sharp flake can remove flesh faster than teeth alone. A joint can be separated. A limb can be detached and carried. A hammerstone may open bones after the most obvious meat has disappeared. The tool does not make Homo habilis dominant. It makes a few dangerous minutes more productive. The archaeological record captures only the aftermath. Cut marks on bone can show where stone passed through muscle or tendon. Tooth marks can show where carnivores fed. Percussion fractures can indicate marrow extraction. When these traces overlap, researchers try to reconstruct sequence. Did hominins arrive before hyenas? While substantial flesh remained, did they come later and recover what was left? Did carnivores return after hominins departed? The answers differ from site to site, and the marks are not always clear. A cut mark crossing a tooth mark may suggest that stone came later. A tooth mark over a cut may suggest the reverse. But bone surfaces are damaged by trampling, weathering, sediment pressure, and excavation. Some marks resemble one another. A small sample can create a misleading pattern. Scholars still debate many individual assemblages because no single method removes every uncertainty. What survives in the record suggests that early Homo was neither always first nor always last. At some carcasses, hominins may have gained early access to fleshy limbs. At others, they probably scavenged after carnivores. Sometimes they may have taken only small pieces. Sometimes they may have remained long enough to process multiple bones. The behavior was likely opportunistic because the landscape itself was unpredictable. Finding a carcass required attention to distant clues. Circling birds could reveal a kill beyond a ridge. Alarm calls might indicate a predator nearby. Tracks and drag marks could lead toward remains. The smell of blood might carry far in dry air. Such clues offered information, but following them meant moving toward danger. A group had to approach carefully, perhaps pausing repeatedly to scan grass, trees, and shadow. The danger did not come only from the animal that made the kill. Other scavengers could arrive from several directions. Hyenas were particularly formidable competitors. Their social organization, endurance, powerful jaws, and ability to digest bone made them exceptionally successful. They did not simply clean up leftovers, they could hunt, steal kills, and defend carcasses aggressively. A small hominin could not reliably drive them away. Saber-toothed cats and other extinct predators added threats unlike any modern African community. Some may have specialized in ambushing large prey. Others may have dragged carcasses toward cover. A kill beneath trees or among rocks could be especially risky because visibility was poor. The same woodland patch that offered Homo habilis refuge could conceal a predator at close range. Crocodiles made water edges dangerous. Leopards or leopard-like cats may have hunted primates. Large raptors could threaten smaller animals. Even herbivores could be lethal when startled or defensive. The ancient landscape was not divided neatly into predators and harmless prey. A frightened buffalo-like bovid, an elephant guarding space, or a hippo near water could kill without intending to feed. This pressure may have favored the group vigilance. Several individuals can watch more directions than one. While some process food, others may remain alert. There is no direct fossil evidence of lookout roles, and it would be too strong to imagine formal coordination. But many living primates gain safety through collective awareness. For a ground foraging hominin, the benefit would have been immediate. Group presence also creates competition. A carcass is valuable, and not every individual necessarily gains equal access. Stronger or higher-ranking members may feed first. Smaller pieces may be taken away. Tolerance may vary according to kinship, alliance, or simple abundance. The evidence cannot reveal these social details, yet the structure of the resource makes some form of negotiation unavoidable. Stone tools intensify that negotiation. A sharp flake is useful, but it may be controlled by the individual holding it. A hammerstone can open marrow, but only if time allows. A detached limb can be carried to another location, creating access away from the crowded carcass. This may reduce conflict with predators while introducing new patterns of sharing or competition within the group. Transport becomes especially important when the carcass site is too dangerous for prolonged feeding. Removing a portion of meat or bone allows the group to retreat toward cover, shade, or higher ground. A limb may be taken to a place where suitable hammerstones already lie. Food and tools can therefore move in opposite directions, stone carried toward the carcass, bone carried away from it. Such movement leaves archaeological patterns that are difficult to interpret but deeply revealing. A concentration of broken bones may not mark where an animal died. It may mark where selected parts were brought. A tool assemblage may represent repeated visits rather than one event. Sediments can mix materials from different moments. The site is not a photograph. It is an accumulation of actions, disturbances, and later geological change. The famous early archaeological localities of East Africa were once described as home bases, places where groups returned, shared food, and organized daily life. That interpretation was appealing because it seemed recognizably human. Later researchers became more cautious. bone and stone concentrations can form through water movement, carnivore activity, repeated scavenging, or the gradual use of favoured landscape features. Some sites may have been processing areas, others may have been brief stopping points. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet caution does not erase the behavioural significance. Even a short-lived concentration can reveal coordination between resources. Stones were brought where they were needed. Bones were opened. Edges were discarded. The location held enough value to attract repeated action. A patch of ground became temporarily structured by technology. The carcass itself may also have been a source of information beyond food. Predators reveal where prey animals move. Broken vegetation shows the direction of a struggle. Fresh dung, tracks, and blood indicate recent activity. Learning to read these signs would help hominins avoid danger as well as locate opportunity. The line between scavenger and observer becomes important. A creature that watches other species can use their behavior as part of its own survival strategy. This form of attention may have demanded rapid judgment. A distant lion resting with a full belly presents a different risk from a hidden cat guarding a fresh kill. Vultures on the ground mean something different from vultures still descending. Hyena calls at dusk may shorten the safe interval. The value of a carcass changes minute by minute. Homo habilis lives within these unstable windows. Its tools are effective only when combined with awareness. A flake cannot help if the group approaches too early. A hammerstone is useless if carried into an ambush. Technical skill and ecological judgment must work together. Over time, repeated encounters with carcasses may have shaped routes and expectations. Certain waterholes, migration corridors, or predator territories could offer recurring opportunities. Groups may have learned where animals became trapped in mud, where cats dragged kills, or where bones accumulated after dry seasons. Memory turns danger into a pattern, though never a safe one. The lesser-known reality of early meat acquisition is therefore not a heroic hunt and not passive scavenging. It is a form of calculated trespass. Homo habilis enters feeding spaces created by larger animals and tries to leave before the balance changes. Its success depends on speed, attention, useful stone, and perhaps the presence of companions. In these moments, technology does not remove fear. It operates inside fear. The hand cuts while the eyes scan. The hammer falls while ears remain tuned to grass and distant calls. Every piece of meat is measured against the possibility of being noticed. The scene ends quickly. A sound shifts in the brush. Birds lift suddenly. The group withdraws, carrying what it can. Behind them remain flakes, fractured bone, and marks too small to seem important. Yet those marks preserve a new strategy in human evolution, not overpowering the world, but extracting advantage from it before the world closes in again. The brain of Homo habilis is often described as larger than that of earlier Australopiths, but the word larger can carry more drama than the fossils justify. Estimates vary from one specimen to another, and the sample itself may include more than one species. Some cranial capacities fall near the upper range of Australopiths. Others extend beyond it. The increase is real enough to matter, yet it is modest, uneven, and far from the dramatic expansion seen later in human evolution. Homo habilis does not possess a modern mind enclosed within an ancient skull. It represents a subtler stage, when slightly greater neural capacity may have become increasingly valuable because daily survival demanded more choices. A changing landscape rewards more than memory in the simple sense of recognizing a place. It rewards the ability to connect places with different resources. A hominin may find good stone near one river channel, edible plants in a woodland margin, water in a seasonal basin, and animal remains on more open ground. None of these places supplies everything. Survival depends on moving between them, remembering their value and adjusting when rainfall, competition, or danger changes the route. Stone technology intensifies this mental burden. A suitable cobble is not merely an object in the present. It contains possible future edges. Carrying it means acting on a need that has not yet appeared. The toolmaker must recognize useful material, retain some expectation of where it may be needed, and accept the immediate cost of transport. This does not prove long-term planning in the modern sense. A journey of several kilometers with stone may result from repeated habits, learned routes, or short-term anticipation, but it reveals behavior extending beyond whatever lies directly in front of the eyes. At Nyanga and other early sites, preferred raw materials were sometimes moved away from their natural sources. In the lower Omo Valley, stone appears at resource-rich locations where suitable material was scarce, suggesting that hominins provisioned places or carried tools into them. These patterns create the possibility of a mental geography organized around more than food. A landscape becomes a network of remembered qualities: stone here, water there, carcasses sometimes beyond the ridge, shelter near the trees. The brain required for this system need not resemble the modern human brain in organization or complexity. Brain size alone cannot reveal thought. Two species can possess similar volumes while differing in internal structure, development, connectivity, and behavior. Fossil skulls preserve the outer shape of the brain case, not neurons, chemical signals, or lived experience. Researchers can examine impressions on the inner surface of the skull and infer broad changes in certain regions, but claims about language or specific cognitive abilities remain uncertain. Older interpretations sometimes treated possible changes near areas corresponding to language regions in modern humans as evidence that Homo Habilis possessed early speech. That conclusion goes beyond what the fossils can support. The shape of an endocast cannot demonstrate grammar, vocabulary, or spoken teaching. The vocal tract is poorly known, and communication leaves no direct archaeological trace at this age. Homo habilis almost certainly used calls, gestures, facial expressions, body posture, and attention to gaze, as other social primates do. Whether those signals included anything approaching symbolic language remains unknown. Complex communication is not required for Oldowan's skill to spread. An inexperienced individual can watch another select a hammerstone, orient a core, and strike. The sound and visible result provide immediate feedback. A successful flake can be handled and used. Repeated exposure creates opportunities for imitation, stimulus enhancement, and practice. An experienced individual may influence learning simply by tolerating another nearby. Yet social learning changes the value of intelligence. A discovery made by one individual can affect others. A useful technique does not have to be rediscovered independently in every lifetime. The group becomes a store of behavior larger than any one brain. This is an early form of culture in the broad biological sense, patterns acquired socially and maintained through repetition. The remarkable stability of Oldowan technology demonstrates both the power and the limits of this process. The basic method endured for immense spans of time. That persistence suggests successful transmission, but it also shows that change was slow. The technology did not improve continuously toward later forms. Assemblages vary, and makers adapted to local materials. Yet the general strategy remained effective enough that radical redesign was unnecessary. Modern observers may mistake stability for lack of intelligence. A tool tradition that changes little across hundreds of thousands of years can seem unimaginative, but successful behavior often persists because it solves recurring problems efficiently. Sharp flakes require little preparation, can be produced from many materials, and serve multiple purposes. Innovation has costs. A new technique must be learned, transmitted, and made reliable. In an unstable environment, a flexible, simple tool may be more useful than a complex object requiring rare materials or lengthy production. Homo habilis therefore lives within a cognitive world shaped by practical decisions rather than abstract invention. Which stone is worth carrying? Is the carcass safe to approach? Should a limb be processed here or move toward cover? Which root still has water? Where did fruit ripen after the last rains? When should the group leave before competitors arrive? No single decision is uniquely human. Together, repeated day after day, they create pressure for attention, memory, behavioral flexibility, and learning. Diet may have strengthened this feedback. Access to meat, marrow, and other energy-rich foods could support a more energetically expensive brain. But the relationship is not a simple transaction in which eating meat automatically produces intelligence. Brains require energy throughout growth and adulthood. Improved dietary quality may help meet that cost, while tool use improves access to certain foods. Greater learning ability makes tools more effective. This creates a possible feedback loop. Behavior broadens diet. Diet supports neural tissue, and neural tissue improves behavioral flexibility. The evidence remains incomplete, and several pieces of the loop cannot be measured directly. Brain expansion may also relate to social complexity, developmental change, ecological instability, or broader shifts in life history. No single explanation fully accounts for the pattern. Early human evolution is unlikely to have been driven by one food, one tool, or one climatic event. Social life adds another set of choices. A small group must remain close enough for protection without exhausting the same food patch. Individuals compete, but they also benefit from tolerance and shared vigilance. A carcass or stoneworking site brings bodies together. One individual's actions can attract predators or reveal food. Tools may be observed, borrowed, taken, or abandoned. Relationships influence access to resources even when the details leave no trace. A slightly larger or more reorganized brain may have helped individuals navigate this social uncertainty. Recognizing companions, remembering past interactions, interpreting alarm, and anticipating the behavior of others are demanding tasks. Again, none is uniquely human, but when social judgment combines with technological practice and a variable landscape, cognition becomes central to survival in a new way. The childhood and development of Homo habilis are poorly understood. Its offspring likely required care and opportunities to learn, but the length of development cannot be reconstructed confidently from the available fossils. A longer learning period could support greater skill acquisition, yet it would also increase dependence on adults. Any change in developmental timing would affect group behavior, food sharing, and vulnerability. Scholars still debate when the prolonged human life history began, and Homo habilis may retain a pattern closer to earlier hominins than to modern people. What can be said with greater confidence is that Oldowan technology does not exist without learning. A stone edge may be simple, but a tradition lasting across generations requires young individuals to become competent before experienced makers disappear. The survival of knowledge depends on social proximity and repetition. The brain is no longer responding only to climate, predators, and food. It is responding to a world already modified by previous minds. This may be the most important cognitive change associated with Homo habilis. Each individual is born into a landscape containing artifacts, worked stone, habitual roots, and group practices. The environment includes natural features and inherited behavior. A flake discarded by one individual may be picked up by another. A productive location may be revisited because others have already demonstrated its value. Experience accumulates outside the skull. Stone thus becomes a form of external memory. The scars on a core reveal where earlier blows landed. A discarded flake preserves a successful fracture. A concentration of tools marks a place where hominins repeatedly acted. The object does not remember consciously, but it carries information in its shape. Another hand can read that shape through touch and use. Homo habilis stands at a point where this external record is becoming increasingly important. Its brain remains small, its cognition unknowable in detail, and its technology basic. Yet difficult choices are drawing mind, body, material, and social learning into the same system. Intelligence is not suddenly awakened. It is recruited again and again by practical problems. The deeper transformation is therefore not contained in cranial capacity alone. It lies in the growing dependence on remembered places, learned actions, transported materials, and the behavior of companions. A brain shaped within such a world does not act by itself. It works through hands, stones, roots, and relationships. The skull of Homo habilis may be only modestly larger than those before it, but the cognitive environment surrounding that skull has begun to expand far beyond the body. Movement gives the stone its full meaning. A flake made and used in one place is useful, but a core carried across several kilometers becomes part of a wider strategy. It links one patch of landscape to another. The body pays the cost in weight and effort, yet the object preserves a future advantage. For Homo habilis and other Oldowan hominins, travel may therefore have been shaped not only by hunger and water, but by the location of raw material. The lower Omo Valley offers a particularly revealing example. Around 2.3 million years ago, hominins visited places rich in biological resources but poor in suitable stone. Quartz and other useful materials appear there despite originating farther away. Some pieces may have arrived as unmodified cobbles, others may have been partially worked before transport. The pattern suggests that stone was moved into areas where it would be needed rather than gathered only at the moment of use. This does not prove that Homo habilis followed a carefully imagined itinerary. The makers cannot be identified securely, and the distance travelled by each individual object is not always clear. Rivers can move stone. Sediments can mix. Repeated short journeys can create the appearance of longer transport. Even so, the broader pattern reveals purposeful selection. Hominins were not always accepting the nearest available rock. They sometimes chose better material and carried it across a landscape divided into separate zones of opportunity. That division matters. A place with abundant stone may contain little food. A wooded patch may offer fruit and shelter, but no suitable cobbles. A lake margin may attract animals while exposing anyone who approaches it. A carcass site may be rich for an hour and dangerous moments later. Daily life requires movement among resources that rarely occur together. The routes between them are not empty. Open ground increases visibility but removes cover. Woodland conceals a traveller while also concealing predators. Mud slows movement near water. Steep slopes may favour a body with strong arms. while long stretches of grassland expose the limitations of short legs. Homo habilis moves upright, but probably not with the efficient, long-striding gait later associated with Homo erectus. Its travel is likely measured, interrupted, and closely tied to safe refuges. The relatively long arms of Homo habilis may have helped in broken terrain, climbing, and carrying close to the body, but they do not make transport effortless. A hand holding stone cannot grip a branch as securely. A large core adds weight during a climb. Carrying food creates the same conflict. Every object imposes an immediate cost in exchange for possible future value. This trade-off becomes one of the quiet foundations of technological life. An animal ordinarily carries only its body and whatever food remains in its mouth or digestive system. A tool user carries potential. The stone may not be useful at the moment it is lifted. Its value lies elsewhere, perhaps beyond the next ridge or beside a river that cannot supply good raw material of its own. Such transport requires at least short-term anticipation. The carrier must behave as though another situation is likely to occur. That expectation may arise from memory, routine, or observation rather than abstract planning. A group that repeatedly visits a feeding area can learn that stone is scarce there. Carrying material along a familiar route can become habitual without anyone imagining a distant future in modern terms. Habit, however, is still a powerful form of knowledge. A route used through many seasons contains remembered water, shade, danger, and opportunity. Certain trees may signal a wet patch. Animal trails may lead toward reliable crossings. Exposed gravel bars may yield good stone after floods. The landscape becomes layered with practical associations. Some of these associations change quickly. A river shifts course, a spring dries. Vegetation closes an old path. Predators begin using a favored waterhole. Environmental instability punishes rigid memory. The useful map is not fixed. It must be revised through observation. Homo habilis may have survived partly because its foraging strategy allowed this revision. It was not tied completely to one food or one habitat. Stone tools broadened what could be processed, while movement connected scattered resources. The combination provided resilience when local conditions changed. A group could alter routes, visit different patches, and carry useful material into places that lacked it. But flexibility has limits. Water still anchors movement. In hot environments, a small hominin cannot range indefinitely without access to drink and shade. Dry seasons concentrate groups and animals near shrinking sources, increasing competition. Wet seasons may disperse resources and make travel easier while obscuring familiar landmarks. Routes must balance distance against risk. The time of day may also have shaped movement. Cooler mornings and late afternoons reduce heat stress. Midday shade offers relief, but may be occupied by other animals. Darkness increases danger and makes stone transport, climbing, and carcass processing more difficult. The daily landscape changes as light, temperature, and animal activity shift. Travel in groups offers protection but creates coordination problems. Individuals do not share identical needs. One may be hungry while another remains alert. A group moves only as quickly as its least mobile member. Carrying stone or food affects pace. Separation increases vulnerability. Although the social organization of Homo habilis is unknown, coordinated movement must have required sensitivity to the position and behavior of companions. There may also have been repeated meeting points. A productive stone source, reliable water margin, or sheltered ridge could attract different groups over time. Archaeological concentrations sometimes reflect many visits rather than one prolonged occupation. The same place may have been used for napping during one season, feeding during another, and simple passage in between. These repeated visits can make a site appear more socially organized than it was. Early researchers sometimes imagined stable home bases where food was shared and daily life centered. Later analysis has shown that water, carnivores, sediment, and repeated short occupations can produce complex accumulations. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single model explains every site. Still, repeated use gives places history. A familiar area may contain discarded flakes from earlier visits. A core left behind can be used again. Stone itself becomes a reason to return. In this way, hominins begin altering the future usefulness of locations. That change is subtle but important. A natural stone source exists without hominin action. A napping place accumulates human-made edges, fragments, and partly reduced cores. The next visitor encounters a landscape already modified by earlier behavior. Technology creates secondary resources. A discarded flake may be sharp enough for immediate use. A battered hammerstone may still serve another task. Even waste has value under the right conditions. The archaeological debris of one episode can become the toolkit of another. This possibility makes it difficult to know whether every artifact at a site was produced there or simply reused. The movement of stone also reveals preference. Some materials were selected despite greater transport costs, because they fractured more predictably or held useful edges. Quartz can be difficult to control but produce sharp fragments. Fine-grained volcanic rocks may offer more reliable fracture. Basalt can be durable and effective for heavy work. The exact choices differ by region because geology differs, but the principle remains material properties influenced movement. Comparisons with wild chimpanzees show that selecting and transporting stone is not uniquely human. Chimpanzees may carry hammerstones to nut-cracking sites and choose tools according to weight and hardness. Such behavior demonstrates that technical landscapes can arise without modern language. The Oldowan pattern goes further in one crucial respect: transported stone is deliberately fractured to create new edges, and those edges serve multiple tasks. This flexibility increases the range over which material remains useful. A hammerstone is suited mainly to striking. A core contains several potential flakes. A detached flake can travel separately. One cobble may therefore generate a sequence of tools at different locations. The object is not merely carried, its usefulness can be divided over time. That sequence may have changed how hominins perceive distance. A location far from stone is less limiting if material can be transported there. A carcass beyond the source becomes accessible. A resource patch no longer needs to contain every requirement for processing. Technology loosens the connection between where material is found and where it is used. The same principle will later transform human history through containers, fire, clothing, boats, and stored food. At this early stage, the change is far smaller, but its logic is already present. An external object allows one place to supply another. Homo habilis becomes part of a geography made not only from rivers and trees, but from remembered relationships between resources. Stone lies upstream. Food gathers near the lake. Shelter waits on higher ground. The safest route bends through woodland. The direct route crosses open danger. Movement becomes a series of choices organized around what must be carried and what can be found ahead. No fossil preserves such a journey. What remains are transported cobbles, distant flakes, broken bones, and the body of a hominin still caught between climbing and walking. From these traces, a pattern emerges cautiously. Early tool users were beginning to distribute their activities across space. Stone did not simply help them survive after arrival. It influenced where they went, what they remembered, and which routes remained worth travelling. The landscape was no longer a collection of immediate opportunities. It had become a web of separated needs connected by movement, and with every carried core, the boundary of useful territory expanded slightly beyond the limits of the body alone. The farther Homo habilis moves across the landscape, the less solitary its story becomes. Every route toward water, stone, shade, or food passes through a world occupied by other hominins. They share valleys, time, and perhaps tools. The old image of one human species replacing another in orderly succession dissolves here. East Africa around 2 million years ago is not a ladder with one figure on each rung. It is a branching community of experiments. Paranthropus boise is among the most distinctive of these neighbours. Its skull is built around chewing. The face is broad. The cheekbones flare outward. The molars are enormous, and powerful muscles anchor along the cranium. For decades, this anatomy encouraged a simple contrast. Paranthropus was the heavy chewer, bound to a narrow diet and destined to fail. Homo habilis was the flexible tool user, lighter in the face and freer in behaviour. One lineage invested in teeth, the other in intelligence. The fossils do not support such a clean division. Chemical signatures in Paranthropus teeth suggest heavy reliance on grasses, sedges, or related foods, but the exact items and methods of processing remain debated. Its anatomy was specialized. Yet specialization does not mean behavioral rigidity. Paranthropus survived for more than 1 million years, occupied changing environments, and overlapped with several forms of early Homo. A lineage that persists that long is not simply waiting to disappear. Nor can Paranthropus be excluded from the technological world. At Nyanga, very early Oldowan tools occur in the same broad context as Paranthropus teeth and processed animal bones. The association does not prove authorship. Another hominin may have made them. But the site prevents confident claims that stone technology belonged exclusively to Homo. A hand struck those flakes, and the nearby fossils do not identify that hand beyond doubt. This uncertainty changes the atmosphere of shared landscapes. Homo habilis may have watched Paranthropus feeding along marshy margins or moving through woodland patches. The two could have reached the same water sources or feeding grounds. Their diets may have overlapped in some seasons and separated in others. They may have ignored, avoided, or competed with one another. No fossil preserves the moment of contact. Other forms of early Homo add more complexity. Fossils commonly assigned to Homo rudolfensis suggest a larger-faced hominin with different dental proportions living in East Africa during part of the same broad interval. Whether every specimen belongs to a separate species remains controversial, but the anatomical variation is real. Homo habilis was not necessarily the only lightly built, relatively large-brained hominin moving through the region. Then Homo erectus appears. Its arrival marks one of the clearest changes in body design seen in early human evolution. Compared with Homo habilis, Homo erectus is generally taller, longer-legged, and more efficient at moving across open ground. Its arms are proportionally shorter. The body suggests a stronger commitment to terrestrial travel and a broader-ranging life. For a long time, Homo erectus was placed after Homo habilis, as though the first transformed into the second and then disappeared. The dates now make that sequence less secure. Some fossils suggest that Homo habilis and early Homo erectus overlapped in East Africa. If these assignments are correct, the smaller, long-armed form did not vanish before the taller, long-legged form emerged. They inhabited portions of the same world. That overlap does not tell us how they interacted. Homo erectus may have travelled farther between water and food and handled sustained walking more effectively. Homo habilis may have retained advantages in wooded or broken terrain. The two could have used different portions of the landscape, reducing direct competition. Alternatively, their ranges and diets may have overlapped substantially. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single ecological model explains every fossil locality. Technology offers no easy solution. Oldowan flakes continue after Homo erectus appears. The emergence of a more modern body does not immediately erase older tool strategies. Later, Acheulean hand axes and other large cutting tools enter the record, often associated with Homo erectus or closely related populations. Yet Oldowan methods persist beside them. A species capable of producing a hand axe can still make a simple flake when that is all the task requires. This overlap warns against assigning every artifact tradition to one species. Different hominins may have made similar tools. One species may have used more than one strategy. A flake does not carry the anatomy of its maker. Archaeology preserves behavior, but behavior and species rarely align with perfect clarity. The coexistence of several hominins also means that evolution was not moving toward one predetermined human form. Paranthropus followed one successful path, investing heavily in a powerful chewing system. Homo habilis combined a modestly enlarged brain with a small, primitive body and growing dependence on external tools. Homo erectus developed a different body suited to broader movement. These lineages were not stages in a contest whose winner was known in advance. They were populations responding to local pressures with different combinations. Fragmented habitats may have helped maintain this diversity. Marshes reward one feeding strategy. Open grasslands reward another. Wooded slopes favour climbing and access to fruit. River margins concentrate stone and animal remains. When environments shift repeatedly, no single body plan is ideal everywhere. Competition still mattered. Water sources shrink during dry periods. Preferred foods become scarce. Carcasses attract many species at once. Hominins with overlapping needs could have displaced one another locally or altered their movements to avoid conflict. Yet direct violence cannot be inferred from coexistence alone. Competition may have worked quietly through access, timing, and reproductive success rather than visible confrontation. The possibility of social learning across species is speculative, but the shared technological environment keeps it open. If different hominins observed one another at stone sources or feeding sites, techniques might spread without close social integration. Similar tools could also arise independently because the mechanics of stone fracture constrain what works. Scholars still debate whether technological similarities reflect shared tradition, convergent problem-solving, or both. What is clear is that Homo habilis did not carry the human future alone. It existed among relatives with their own successful adaptations. Some had larger chewing teeth, some had larger bodies, some may have ranged farther, some may also have shaped stone. The landscape contained multiple answers to the same pressures. This crowded setting changes the emotional scale of the story. Homo habilis is no longer the lonely first human standing above an ape-like past. It is one branch among several, uncertain in status and vulnerable to replacement. Its tools do not guarantee survival. Its larger brain does not make it dominant. Its flexibility offers advantages, but those advantages are tested against neighbours equally shaped by millions of years of evolution. Eventually, some branches continue and others end. From the distance of the present, it is tempting to treat survival as proof of superiority, but extinction can result from climate, population size, chance, competition, or the accumulation of small disadvantages. A lineage may be well adapted for hundreds of thousands of years and still vanish when conditions shift beyond its range. For now, however, the branches remain alive together. On one ancient floodplain, a Paranthropus jaw crushes tough food. Somewhere beyond it, a small Homo Habilis carries stone toward a feeding place. Farther away, an early Homo erectus body covers ground with longer strides. Their tracks may cross even if their bones never do. The human family at this moment is not becoming one thing, it is becoming many things at once, and the presence of so many overlapping forms raises a deeper problem when the fossils differ. How many species are actually being seen, and how many names have been placed upon fragments that may belong together? The question seems simple until the fossils are placed side by side. How many kinds of early Homo were actually living in East Africa? The answer depends on which differences are treated as normal variation, which are treated as changes through time, and which are considered large enough to mark separate species. Homo habilis sits at the center of this dispute because the collection assigned to it is unusually diverse. Some specimens have smaller brain cases and more projecting faces. Others appear larger-brained or differently proportioned. Jaws and teeth do not always match comfortably. The body remains known from fragments that may not belong to individuals with the best-preserved skulls. The category holds together, but never without strain. A fossil species is not defined in the same way as a living species. No one can observe which individuals chose one another as mates. DNA has not survived from Homo habilis. Behavior cannot be watched across generations. Researchers must work from anatomy, geological age, and geographic distribution. They compare measurements, shapes, patterns of growth, and combinations of traits. From these comparisons, they decide whether a fossil fits within the expected range of one species or lies far enough outside it to justify another name. The difficulty is that the expected range is unknown until the fossils are classified. A small sample can make ordinary variation look extraordinary. A large male and a small female may appear to belong to different species. Juveniles can differ from adults. Populations separated by hundreds of kilometers may develop regional distinctions while remaining members of one lineage. Fossils separated by several 100,000 years may show gradual evolutionary change rather than coexistence between separate species. Distortion adds further uncertainty. A skull compressed by sediment may appear broader or flatter than it was in life. A jaw reconstructed from fragments may seem longer depending on how pieces are aligned. Missing bone forces estimates. Even measurements that look precise may rest on damaged landmarks. Digital methods can reduce some of these problems, but they cannot restore anatomy that was never preserved. The contrast between KNMER 1813 and KNMER 1470 has long symbolized the debate. KNMER 1813 is small and relatively lightly built, with a modest cranial capacity. KNMER 1470 has a larger brain case, a broad face, and different dental proportions. At first, both could be placed within an expansive Homo habilis. Later, many researchers assigned the larger-faced form to Homo rudolfensis. That solution creates two species where one had existed before, but it does not settle which other fossils belong with each one. Some specimens appear intermediate, Others preserve only teeth or jaw fragments that can be interpreted in more than one way. A fossil may resemble Homo habilis in one feature and Homo rudolfensis in another. Evolution does not always produce neatly packaged combinations, especially when closely related populations are diverging. Hybridization between neighboring lineages is also biologically possible, though there is no direct evidence for it here. The record may preserve a spectrum because the living populations themselves were not sharply divided. There is also the question of whether Homo habilis belongs in Homo at all. Some researchers argue that its small body, long arms, climbing adaptations, and primitive cranial features place it closer to Australopithecus. Under that interpretation, the species might be renamed Australopithecus habilis. While Homo would begin later with a body and life history more like those of Homo erectus, others maintain that the changes in brain size, dental reduction, hand function, diet, and technological dependence justify keeping it within the human genus. Neither option is merely a matter of vocabulary. The boundary chosen for Homo shapes the story of human origins. A broad genus emphasizes gradual transition and accepts a highly primitive earliest member. A narrow genus emphasizes a more integrated shift in body proportions, brain organization, development, and ecology. Depending on the definition, Homo begins as a small climber using Oldowan tools, or as a longer-legged terrestrial hominin capable of wider dispersal. Tool use cannot resolve the issue. Stone technology once seemed like a clear behavioral boundary, but tools now predate the known appearance of Homo habilis. Paranthropus remains a possible maker in some contexts. Earlier hominins modified stone before the genus Homo is securely identified. If technology is used to define Homo, the definition risks pulling unknown or non-Homo toolmakers into the genus. If technology is ignored, one of the most important behavioral changes in the record loses taxonomic weight. Brain size is equally unreliable as a single criterion. The cranial capacities attributed to Homo habilis overlap with those of some Australopiths and approach those of other early Homo specimens. Size alone says little about internal organization. A larger brain does not automatically indicate modern cognition. While a smaller brain does not exclude complex learned behavior, there is no universally agreed volume at which a skull becomes human. The new partial skeleton KNMER 64061 intensifies the problem because it gives the body greater visibility while lacking a complete associated skull. Its anatomy fits a small, long-armed, primitive form consistent with Homo habilis, but assignment depends on comparison rather than direct cranial identification. If early Homo included several similar species, a partial skeleton may be difficult to place securely. The fossil is enormously informative about one body type present just over 2 million years ago, but the name attached to that body remains an interpretation. O62 presents a similar challenge. Its limb fragments have been used to reconstruct Australopith-like proportions, yet the remains are incomplete and difficult to estimate. If OH62 and KNMER 64061 belong to Homo habilis, the species clearly retains substantial primitive anatomy. If either belongs elsewhere, the body of Homo habilis becomes less certain again. Every assignment affects the portrait. Taxonomy can therefore change with each important fossil. A new skull may reveal that two specimens once grouped together are more distinct than expected. A new skeleton may show that a species thought to have modern proportions remained primitive below the neck. Improved dating may prove that two forms overlapped rather than followed one another. A single discovery can reorganize museum labels, evolutionary diagrams, and decades of interpretation. There is a danger in both extremes. Splitting every unusual fossil into a new species creates a crowded tree built from small samples. Individual differences become evolutionary branches, yet combining too many fossils into one species can hide real diversity and produce an imaginary creature with a range of anatomy no living population would possess. Scholars must decide how much variation is plausible without having a complete population for comparison. Living primates offer some guidance. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans all show variation in size, facial form, teeth, and skeletal proportions. Sexual dimorphism can be substantial. Regional populations may differ, but fossil samples are rarely large enough to define those ranges confidently. A handful of skulls spread across vast areas and long periods cannot be treated like a modern biological population collected at one moment. Time is especially important. Homo habilis may have existed for several 100,000 years. During such a span, populations could change gradually, divide geographically, reconnect, or be replaced. Treating every fossil within that interval as anatomically static would be unrealistic. What is called Homo habilis may represent a lineage evolving through time rather than one fixed form. Alternatively, the name may conceal several branches. East Africa's lakes and rift valleys could isolate populations temporarily. Climate shifts might reconnect them. Different groups could adapt to local diets, movement patterns, and habitats. The fossil record would then preserve a complex population history that simple species labels flatten into a few categories. No single explanation fully accounts for the variation. The most cautious position is not that classification is impossible, but that every name remains a working hypothesis. Homo habilis is useful because it identifies a recognizable cluster of early Homo fossils associated with a critical evolutionary period. Homo rudolfensis may capture another cluster. Australopithecus and Paranthropus remain distinct enough in many features to structure comparison, but the borders between these groups should not be mistaken for lines drawn by nature itself. The debate also reveals how strongly scientific stories depend on categories. Once a fossil is labelled Homo, it is more easily placed on the path toward modern humans. Once labelled Australopithecus, it can appear more distant. Once assigned to a separate species, variation becomes diversity. The bone itself does not change, but its narrative role does. Homo habilis endures because it occupies a real region of evolutionary uncertainty. The uncertainty is not a weakness to be removed from the story. It is the story, a small-bodied hominin with a somewhat enlarged brain, versatile hands, primitive limbs, and probable involvement in Oldowan technology appears repeatedly in the record. Whether every fossil assigned to that image belongs to one species remains unresolved. The drawers may therefore contain more than one kind of creature under the same name, or they may contain the natural variation of a lineage stretched across geography and time. Future discoveries may split the collection further, reunite specimens now separated, or move the entire species closer to Australopithecus. Until then, Homo habilis remains a scientific boundary object solid enough to study, unstable enough to argue over, and positioned exactly where the human family tree becomes too crowded for a simple line. A species can disappear from the fossil record long before anyone understands what ended it. The final bones do not arrive with an explanation attached. They become rarer, then absent, while other forms appear more often in the same broad regions. For Homo habilis, there is no single last individual, no final occupation layer, and no unmistakable catastrophe. The species fades through gaps in sediment and changes in classification, leaving an ending almost as uncertain as its beginning. The youngest fossils commonly assigned to Homo habilis may date to around 1.5 million years ago, though the exact boundary depends on which specimens are accepted. By then, East Africa contains hominins with a very different body plan. Homo erectus, or closely related early African form sometimes called Homo ergaster, is taller, longer-legged, and more efficient at moving across open landscapes. Its brain is generally larger. Its body is less committed to climbing. In some regions, Acheulean tools begin to appear, including large cutting implements shaped through more extensive sequences of flaking. It is tempting to treat this as a simple replacement. A more advanced human arrives, outcompetes Homo habilis, and inherits the world. But that story moves far beyond the surviving evidence. The two forms may have overlapped for hundreds of thousands of years. Oldowan technology continues even after larger body Homo appears. Smaller hominins may have occupied different habitats, followed different routes, or relied on resources that reduced direct competition. The record does not show one species defeating another in a single decisive transition. Competition could still have mattered quietly. A longer-legged body allows more efficient travel between scattered resources. It may improve access to carcasses, distant water, and raw material. A larger body can alter predator risk and expand the range of prey or foods that can be processed. If Homo erectus groups move through wider territories, they may have reached productive sites more regularly or endured longer periods in open environments. Even small advantages in survival and reproduction can reshape populations over many generations without leaving evidence of direct conflict. Climate may have added pressure. East African environments continued to fluctuate. Grasslands expanded in some regions. Lakes rose and fell. Wooded habitats shifted and fragmented. A small, long-armed hominin able to use trees and broken terrain may have remained successful in mosaic environments, but increasing openness could favor longer legs and more terrestrial movement. That does not mean one climatic event destroyed Homo habilis. Environmental change was repeated, uneven, and local. Some populations may have declined while others survived elsewhere for long periods. The disappearance may also be partly taxonomic. A fossil assigned to late Homo habilis by one researcher may be classified as early Homo erectus, Homo rudolfensis, or an uncertain form by another. When species are defined from incomplete bones, the last appearance can move according to how those bones are interpreted. The apparent ending may therefore include a scientific boundary imposed on gradual biological change. If Homo habilis populations evolved into later Homo in some regions, then the species did not vanish in the ordinary sense. Its descendants changed enough to receive another name. But the coexistence of primitive and more modern forms suggests that the transition was not a single lineage transforming uniformly. Some populations may have contributed to later Homo, while others remained distinct and eventually died out. Both continuity and extinction may be hidden beneath the same sparse record. Population size is another invisible factor. Homo habilis may never have been numerous. Small, scattered groups are vulnerable even when well adapted. Drought, disease, local food failure, or the loss of a few reproductive individuals can have large effects. A population does not need to be poorly designed to disappear. It needs only to become too small to recover from repeated disruptions. This vulnerability would be especially severe in fragmented habitats. Groups separated by unsuitable terrain may rarely exchange individuals. Climate shifts can isolate them further. A local population may disappear while another survives hundreds of kilometers away. leaving an archaeological pattern that looks abrupt only because the connecting regions have not been preserved or excavated. Technology offers no guaranteed protection. Oldowan tools broaden access to food and make movement more flexible, but they do not eliminate dependence on water, shelter, and social learning. A tool tradition can persist while the species associated with it disappears because another lineage adopts the same methods. Cultural continuity does not require biological continuity. That distinction matters. For decades, Homo habilis seemed almost inseparable from the Oldowan. If the tools continued, the species appeared to continue through them, but stone cannot identify its maker. Homo erectus used Oldowan strategies. Other early Homo likely did as well. Paranthropus may have participated at some sites. The survival of the technology therefore does not reveal which lineage survived. Later, Acheulean tools are often treated as evidence that Homo erectus possessed a decisive cognitive advantage. Their more extensive shaping and repeated forms do suggest new technical capacities or traditions. Yet the earliest Acheulean is not distributed everywhere, and simple flakes remain useful. A hand axe does not automatically replace a sharp flake. Technological change was regional, overlapping, and uneven. Homo habilis may also have faced changing patterns of food acquisition. Larger-bodied Homo appears increasingly associated with broader foraging ranges, repeated carcass processing, and eventually the exploitation of very large animals. If such groups were better able to transport food, defend access, or coordinate movement, Homo habilis could have lost opportunities without being physically driven away. But these explanations remain hypotheses. No accumulation of cut marks proves competition between species. No climatic curve identifies the year Homo habilis failed. No fossil skeleton displays an extinction cause. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance. The ending may have differed from place to place. In one valley, habitat change may have reduced woodland cover. In another, larger-bodied Homo may have occupied the most productive routes. Elsewhere, small populations may have become isolated. Some may have blended into related groups through interbreeding, though no genetic evidence survives to confirm this. Others may simply have persisted beyond the currently known fossil range. This last possibility must remain open. The youngest discovered fossil is not necessarily the youngest individual who lived. Fossilization is rare. Exposure is rarer. Discovery depends on geology, erosion, excavation, and chance. Homo habilis may have survived later in regions where sediments are inaccessible or where fossils have not yet been recognized. Its disappearance therefore occurs not as a dramatic scene, but as a gradual loss of visibility. The long arms vanish from the known record. Small cranial remains become less common. Taller bodies and larger brain cases become more prominent. Stone tools continue lying beside lakes and rivers, but the hands behind them are increasingly assigned to other forms. From the perspective of the present, Homo erectus appears better prepared for the future. It spreads beyond Africa, occupies broader environments, and persists for an extraordinary span of time. Homo habilis seems transitional by comparison. Yet transitional is a label created by survivors looking backward. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo habilis was not waiting to become something else. It was a functioning animal, adapted to real landscapes, raising generations, learning routes, selecting stone, and surviving among predators and relatives. Its eventual loss does not mean its way of life failed immediately. The Oldowan tradition endured. Flexible foraging expanded. Stone transport continued. The relationship between hand, brain, food, and landscape grew deeper in later Homo. Many of the patterns associated with Homo habilis outlived the body that first made them visible to science. Perhaps this is why its ending remains so difficult to locate. Homo habilis disappears biologically while parts of its world continue behaviorally. The species leaves no monument, but the logic of its survival passes forward, carry what the next place lacks. Change food before it reaches the mouth. Let learned technique compensate for anatomical limits, and allow objects to hold possibilities beyond the present moment. The final Homo habilis population may have ended in drought, competition, isolation, gradual transformation, or some combination that left no clear mark. Its last members would not have known that a lineage was closing. They would have moved through the same practical concerns as those before them: water, shade, stone, food, companions, and the approach of danger. Then the fossil trail grows quiet, not because the stone world ended, but because other hands carried it forward. The deepest legacy of Homo habilis is not a particular skull, a disputed species boundary, or even a single type of stone tool. It is a change in the relationship between a living body and the material world. Before this change, anatomy set most of the limits. Teeth determined what could be bitten. Nails determined what could be scratched. Muscle determined what could be broken. After stone became a reliable part of daily life, those limits began to move outside the body. A sharp flake could cut more effectively than a tooth. A hammerstone could crush what jaws could not. A carried core could preserve several future edges inside one object. Homo habilis was not necessarily the first hominin to make that transformation. Stone modification began earlier, and the Oldowan was probably created and maintained by more than one lineage. Early Homo, Paranthropus, and perhaps other still unidentified makers all remain part of the question. But Homo habilis stands near the point where this new relationship becomes especially visible. Its anatomy, environment, and archaeological context converge around a world increasingly organized by tools. The old nickname handyman survives because it captures something emotionally powerful, even though it carries more certainty than the evidence allows. Homo habilis may not have invented the first sharp edge, it may not have owned the Oldowan tradition, yet it symbolizes the moment when stone was becoming inseparable from how some hominins ate, moved, learned, and endured. The effect on food was immediate and practical. A carcass could be entered through hide, tendons could be severed, marrow could be released from bone, hard or fibrous plants could be cut, scraped, or pounded. These actions changed not only what could be eaten, but when and where eating could happen. A limb could be removed from danger, a portion could be carried toward cover. Processing could begin before the food reached the mouth. Over evolutionary time, external processing may have reduced some of the demands placed on teeth and jaws, though no single cause explains their changing form. More important was the growing flexibility. A tooth is fixed in shape and remains with the body. A stone edge can be discarded, replaced, remade, or used for several tasks. Tool use allowed behavior to respond faster than anatomy could evolve. Stone also changed the hand. The fingers did not become capable because tools suddenly appeared. Earlier hominins already possessed powerful and versatile grips. But repeated tool use placed new value on control, coordination, sensitivity, and learned movement. The hand became a meeting point between inherited anatomy and cultural practice. A successful strike required the body to understand a material that had no nervous system and offered no cooperation. The stone would fracture only according to its structure. That structure had to be learned. A suitable cobble felt different. A useful angle had to be recognized. The force of the blow had to be adjusted. Some of this knowledge lived in the brain, some in trained muscles, and some in the scars left on the core itself. The object carried the history of previous strikes. It became a record another hand could continue. This is one of the earliest places where human evolution begins to depend on information stored outside the body. The stone is not a symbol in the later human sense, but it preserves consequences. A worked core shows that a certain material can be opened. A discarded flake demonstrates a possible edge. A site covered with debris reveals where useful actions have happened before. The landscape begins accumulating traces of learned behavior. Movement changes with it. Raw material is transported toward food. Processed food is carried away from danger. Particular riverbanks become valuable because they supply stone. Other locations become important because animals gather there. Routes connect resources that do not occur together. Memory is no longer only about where food grows or water remains. It also includes where tools can be made and where they will be needed. At first, these connections may have been small. A cobble carried from one gravel bar to a nearby feeding place. A flake retained until the next opportunity. A familiar route repeated after the rains. Yet the logic is vast. One place supplies another. A resource found now can solve a problem later. Material can cross distance before becoming useful. Much of later human history follows this same pattern. Fire carries energy from fuel into food and warmth. Clothing carries protection across climates. Containers move water beyond its source. Boats turn coastlines into routes. Agriculture moves labor into future harvests. Writing stores memory outside the brain. None of these later achievements is contained inside an Oldowan flake, but they belong to the same widening relationship between human need and external material. Homo habilis lived near the beginning of that widening. It remained physically vulnerable. Its brain was modest. Its arms still reflected a life partly shaped by climbing. It possessed no permanent architecture and left no representational art. Yet it participated in a behavioral system that allowed objects to compensate for bodily limits. That system also changed social life. Toolmaking had to be learned. Useful locations had to be remembered. The presence of companions could provide vigilance near predators and opportunities for observation. A technique surviving for hundreds of thousands of years cannot depend on one inventive mind. It must pass repeatedly through groups whose individuals are born without the skill and acquire it through exposure and practice. The stability of the older one is therefore evidence of continuity. It shows that useful behavior endured despite climatic change, population turnover, and perhaps the participation of different species. The tradition remained simple because simplicity worked. A fresh cutting edge could be produced quickly from common materials. It did not require a predetermined final shape or a long manufacturing sequence. Its strength was adaptability. Modern people often measure intelligence through complexity. A symmetrical hand axe appears more impressive than a rough flake. A machine seems more advanced than a hammerstone. But survival does not reward complexity for its own sake. It rewards solutions that match the problem. The Oldowan lasted because it offered portable sharpness, crushing force, and flexibility at low cost. Homo habilis should not be imagined as a primitive engineer consciously beginning a technological revolution. Its makers did not know that stone use would become a defining feature of later humanity. They were solving immediate problems, opening food, reaching marrow, processing plants, making a dangerous opportunity worthwhile, and carrying useful material into a place where none existed. Yet repeated immediate solutions can redirect evolution. Individuals more capable of learning, selecting, carrying, and manipulating tools may gain advantages. Better access to food can affect energy and survival. More valuable skills increase the importance of social learning. Movement becomes organized around external resources. Over generations, behavior changes the pressures acting on anatomy. This is the deeper meaning of stone beginning to shape us. The phrase does not mean that a tool directly redesigned the human body. It means that once survival depended partly on manufactured objects, natural selection began acting within an altered environment, an environment that hominins themselves were helping to create. The body and its surroundings were no longer separate systems. Hand-shaped stone. Stone changed access to food. Food supported bodies and brains. Brains improved learning. Learning stabilized technique. Technique influenced movement. Movement linked landscapes into remembered networks. Each part fed back into the others. Homo habilis lived inside this loop before it became fully human in the later sense. It may not be a direct ancestor of every subsequent Homo population. Some fossils assigned to it may eventually receive other names. Its boundaries may continue to shift as new skeletons emerge. But its historical importance does not depend on occupying one exact position in a family tree. It represents a phase when technology became evolutionarily persistent. The makers could disappear while the method remained. A species might fade, yet the sharp edge survived in other hands. Biological lineages branched and ended, but learned behavior crossed some of those boundaries. That is why the story does not end with extinction. Homo habilis disappears from the known record, but the relationship it embodies expands. Later, Homo carries stone farther. Bodies become better suited to long-distance movement. Toolkits diversify. Animal resources are processed more extensively. Eventually, fire adds another external system, then shelter, clothing, and increasingly complex forms of cooperation. The first stones do not contain all of that future. They contain something quieter, the recognition that matter can be altered to perform work the body cannot. A rock becomes an edge. The edge becomes access. Access becomes a different pattern of movement and survival. The object begins shaping the creature because the creature has begun shaping the object, and now the scene widens again. The lake margins are gone. Rivers have shifted away from the places where flakes once fell. Volcanic ash has hardened into dated layers. The animals surrounding those feeding sites have vanished or changed beyond recognition. Even the hominins who carried the stones survive only as mineral fragments held in museum drawers. A small skeleton from Illuret lies separated from the muscles that once moved it. Long arms remain in bone, but the gestures are gone. A crushed skull from Oldowan holds the outline of a brain, but none of its memories. A hand bone suggests grip, yet cannot preserve the feeling of cold stone against skin. What remains most clearly is the material that outlasted them. A flake rests where it was dropped. Its edge may be dulled by sediment, its surface altered by water and time. But the fracture still records a strike. For a moment, force travelled through an arm into a hammerstone, through the hammerstone into a core, and through the core into a new form. The maker did not know it was leaving history behind. It was hungry, alert, perhaps listening for movement in the grass. It needed an edge before another animal arrived. The act was ordinary within its life. Millions of years later, that ordinary act becomes visible again. Scientists lift the stone, examine its angles, compare its scars, and try to understand the vanished hand. They cannot recover the full species, the exact task, or the thought preceding the blow. They can only follow the trace. Human stories are often fragile because bodies decay and memory ends. Names disappear. Populations merge or vanish. Entire lineages leave only a tooth, a jaw, or a handful of broken bones. Yet sometimes an action enters matter deeply enough to remain. Homo habilis may never be proven the first maker. It does not need to be. Its place is more uncertain and more meaningful than that. It belongs to a world in which many hominins were testing the boundary between body and object, inheritance and learning, landscape and memory. The evening settles over an ancient floodplain. A small figure moves toward the trees, carrying food in one hand and perhaps stone in the other. Behind it, dust gathers over fragments no one will touch again for an unimaginable length of time. The figure disappears. The species will eventually follow. The edge remains,